Chapter 1572. The group walked on the grass of the courtyard ranch. The ground was soft, and puddles of water would occasionally seep out from around their boots. It was clear that the pastures of Wuxia were fertile. As a breeding ground for horses on the Beiliang Road, second only to the Xianli Ranch, Wuxia had a unique climate. Since ancient times, it had been an important source of horses for every prosperous dynasty. The Dafeng dynasty raised 300,000 horses around Wuxia and set up the post of Wuxia horse husbandry supervisor. Lu Zhe, who was said to be on par with the founding emperor of the Dafeng dynasty, had collected 160,000 warhorses during his 2 expeditions to the north. The nobles of northern Mang's Longguan Pass were actually the survivors of the Qin dynasty who migrated north during the chaos of war 800 years ago. If one traced their roots back, they were once the citizens of the Qin dynasty between Longxi and Tongguan. Among the group, the manager of the courtyard ranch, Zhao Liyuan, was particularly nervous. There was nothing he could do. The 5 or 6 people behind him who were temporarily acting as background had official positions, such as Horned Eagle Captain Luo Hongkai. Without exception, they were all the 14 captains of Beiliang. As for the only one who did not have an official position, he was the general of the Beiliang army, Shi Fu, who had been the general of Liangzhou for a few years. Unfortunately, he was dragged down by the label of the previous Beiliang governor-general. Before the new king of Liang could succeed him, Shi Fu had tactfully resigned. For some reason, he was brought up again. Zhao Liyuan did not know whether Shi Fu was going to be punished or make a comeback. Other than the young man beside him being Su Fengnian, the main reason for Zhao Liyuan's uneasiness was that the courtyard ranch had been given a critical order this time. They could only take out less than 5,000 warhorses, and only 600 A-grade warhorses. It was still a lot short of the king of Beiliang's request. However, Zhao Liyuan knew that if the king had come half a year earlier to ask for horses, he would have been able to provide 8,000 A-grade Beiliang warhorses, let alone 8,000 regardless of grade. Previously, the governor-general of Beiliang had urgently transferred 10,000 warhorses from here. These 600 A-grade warhorses were the last of what he had left behind with great difficulty. The imperial envoy from Huaiyang Pass who had come to the ranch to ask for horses had been so anxious that his eyes had turned red. He had cursed that person for doing something shady and said that what was so great about the governor-general of Beiliang. Zhao Liyuan slapped the table and declared that he would submit to the king's Wutongin of Mount Qingliang. However, now that Prince Liang, Su Fengnian, was by his side, Zhao Liyuan did not dare to say anything bad about the Beiliang governor-general of Huaiyang Pass to his face. He could only ramble on and on about how he was incompetent and had failed to live up to his expectations. Zhao Liyuan was not stupid. Not just Beiliang, everyone in the world knew of the relationship between Protector General Chu and the new Prince Liang. It was just that they had different surnames and were truly family. Su Fengnian and Zhao Liyuan walked side by side on the grass of the ranch. Behind them was Shi Fu, who was in the prime of his life but was silent all year round. There was also Horned Eagle Commandant Luo Hongkai and the others. Among them was Longxi Commandant Zhao Rongguang, who was in charge of the security of Liangzhou's western gate. The courtyard ranch was vast and the scenery was beautiful. Longxi's winter was long and there was no summer. It had a unique climate of 6 months of frost, so it was much cooler than other places. However, other than the expressionless Su Fengnian, Luo Hongkai and the others appeared to be burning with anxiety. Even Shi Fu, who had retired from the army for almost 2 years, was frowning. Su Fengnian looked at the lush grass in front of him and was filled with emotion. Since Dafeng's territory extended to the western regions, half of the world's army and horses came from Lianglong. Many members of the imperial family, nobles, and generals raised horses here privately. They liked to use the number of horses they raised to compare their power. Li Gongda, the Beiliang Taoist administrator who was good at making money, had suggested early on whether or not they could lift the ban on horses and sell horses below B class to the officials and nobles of Great Peace City and the Central Plains. This would definitely be a huge income and reduce the tax burden on Beiliang. However, Su Xiao had directly rejected the idea. After the scholars passed away, there was no shortage of scholars who proposed the same strategy. They made a big deal out of the issue of cold horses. Without reducing the reserves of B and C war horses, they could still give taxes and increase the soldiers' pay and provisions. They could make friends with the nobles of the capital and express goodwill to the Liang Zhao clan. It could be said that there were only benefits and no disadvantages. Song Dongming's Dragon's Gate and Su Weisheng's Wutongan didn't dare to make a decision on their own. After handing it over to Su Fengnian to make the decision, they also thought deeply and put the matter aside in the end. Su Fengnian stopped at the top of a gently sloping hill. He raised his eyes and looked out. There was lush greenery all around. Su Fengnian suddenly turned his head and smiled at Zhao Liyuan, who was almost 50 years old. Lord Zhao, this is actually the second time we've met. Back then, this king was still young and accompanied Su Xiao here to avoid the summer heat. I remember that at that time, Lord Zhao had just retired from the border army of Liangzhou and had just taken office at Tianjing Ranch. At that time, there were many things waiting to be done at the ranch. Lord Zhao patted his chest and promised Su Xiao that in less than 10 years, Longxi would become the largest ranch in Liang. I don't know if Lord Zhao still remembers that you promised Su Xiao that one day you would bring out the #1 divine steed in the world to celebrate His Royal Highness, coming to my coming of age. The old man who had dealt with warhorses all his life was immediately moved. With a trembling voice, he said, "Your Highness still remembers, you still remember. How could this lowly one dare to forget? Not to mention that Tianjing Ranch has been carefully and conscientiously cultivating fine horses. For all these years, they have been entrusted to the generals and crossbowmen of the border army. As long as you see that extraordinarily handsome king of wild horses on the plains of the desert, after capturing it, you must send it to Tianjing Ranch." In fact, 4 years ago, there really was a divine steed sent to the ranch, but when your Highness reached your coming of age, this old man mistakenly thought that your Highness had forgotten about it. I was also afraid that people would say that I was a disgraceful official who didn't do his job properly and only knew how to flatter others. After hesitating for many days, in the end, I still didn't send it to the prince's mansion on Mount Qingliang. In the end, I couldn't endure the hundreds of pleas of our cavalry army's deputy commander Zhou and could only send it. If only I had known earlier. Sigh, this old man really regrets it to death. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "It's all right. For our Beiliang cavalry to be where it is today, the Tianjing Ranch, Xianli Ranch, and all the other ranches, big and small, have contributed greatly. Up until now, this king has only been on the battlefield a few times. If we say that he has 2 B-class horses to ride, it's barely enough. If he has another A-class horse, it would be a waste of natural resources." Probably knowing that Zhao Liyuan was going to fight for him, Su Fengnian waved his hand and said, "You all go back first. I have something to discuss with General Shi." Everyone left, leaving behind Shi Fu, who was widely acknowledged in Beiliang to have a bumpy career as an official. This person and the Yuzhou provincial governor Hu Kuei were known as the twin jade annulus of Liangzhou in the past. Although they were young, they were both old men of the border army who had made great contributions to the military. The term twin jade annulus was first used to describe the 2 cavalry generals who first emerged in the Spring and Autumn War, Wuxia and Su Pu. At that time, Su Xiao was still fighting in the Spring and Autumn War and had not yet been conferred the title of king. Therefore, the 2 of them were known as the twin jade annulus of the Su family. Today, one of them lived in seclusion in Dunhuang's city of Beimang, while the other went to Xishan to assist Chen Jibao. Chen Jibao left Liangzhou and entered Xishan, while at the same time, Su Fengnian became the hereditary king of Beiliang. This was the dividing line between Shifu and Hu Kuei in the officialdom. Hu Kuei rose again and became a high-ranking official, while Shifu, who was of a higher rank, was overshadowed and retired to the countryside. But strangely, both Mount Qingliang and the Huaiyang Pass Protectorate headquarters ignored Shifu's resignation. Even when Chu Lushan later took up the post of general of Liangzhou, he did not explicitly inform the Liangzhou military that Shifu had retired from the army. Military reports would still be sent every half a day to the Liangzhou general Shifu, who was resting at home. Chapter 1573. Su Fengnian asked softly, General Shi, this time, the Western Shu sect sent 10,000 elite soldiers to the Guangling sect. Wei Fuqing and Dian Xiongniu were only appointed as deputy generals. An outsider, Huyan Wanruo, was appointed as the main general. As for the border between Beiliang and Western Shu, Chen Jibao assigned a young man named She Yi to guard the northern gate of Western Shu. Regarding these two matters, what do you think, General Shi? Shifu's brows furrowed even more, but he remained silent. Su Fengnian quietly waited for him to continue. It seemed that he was determined to wait for the former confidant of the king of Shu to open his mouth to prove his loyalty. However, Shifu gritted his teeth and remained silent. His expression became increasingly gloomy. If the young vassal king asked about Ji Liuzhou, Huda's city of Liangzhou, or Gord's city of Yuzhou, Shifu believed that he would tell him everything he knew. However, he was indebted to Chen Jibao for nurturing him. Regardless of whether Chen Jibao was going against Beiliang or not, as long as Chen Jibao did not explicitly target Beiliang, Shifu would not turn against Chen Jibao. Even if he angered Su Fengnian today, Shifu would not hesitate to do so. Shifu actually admired this young man from the Su family. However, Shifu could not cross the threshold in his heart when it came to some matters that crossed his bottom line. That was why Zhong Hongwu, the great general of Huaihua, made an exception for Shifu and regarded him as a thorn in his side. Su Fengnian did not wait for an answer. He asked again, if this king says that you can safely move 300 people to Western Shu, will you go there? Shifu hesitated for a moment and smiled bitterly. Unlike Wei Fuqing and Dian Xiongniu, or Che Yi, who came from Beimang, my family is a big family in Liangzhou. Even if I am willing to go to Western Shu and Prince does not stop me, many elders in my family who are used to the customs of Beiliang will not agree to leave their home. This has nothing to do with whether I can become a high-ranking official in Western Shu again. To be honest, Prince, I have no choice but to take 10,000 steps back. In fact, if the Shi family really moved the ancestral tablets to Western Shu, not to mention others, the 3 people of my generation in Beiliang and the 4 nephews serving in the border army of Liangzhou will probably stay in Beiliang. In this way, before we even leave Beiliang, the Shi family will be torn apart. Su Fengnian put on a fake smile and said, at least General Shi is honest with me. Shifu chuckled and said, there's no point in hiding it. I know that the Shi family has spies planted in the Dushui chamber for many years. It's not that I have such discerning eyes, but that before Chu Lushan became the Protector General of the Northern Liang, he made a special trip to the Shi family to meet honestly with me. Therefore, in these 2 years, I have not been able to sleep peacefully. It is funny to say that in my early years in the army, even if I went deep into Beimang and rested on the horses, I would still sleep better than on my own bed. Su Fengnian did not comment on Chu Lushan's spies and the Shi family. He changed the topic and asked with a smile, the courtyard pasture currently has 800 white horse guards, Luo Hongkai, and the 2 captains 3,400 cavalry, plus the Longxi troops of the pasture, and the 2,000 cavalry left behind by Zhao Rongguang, there are still less than 8,000. This king can only wait for 3 days. One of the 2 captains of Liangzhou's Tongguan Pass, Xian Yinma, will also lead 3,000 elite cavalry over. Their numbers will exceed 10,000. General Shi, do you think that these 10,000 cavalry rushing into the battlefield of Liuzhou will be able to provide timely assistance, or will distant water not be able to quench the immediate thirst? The stone talisman asked, "If the stone talisman speaks bluntly, will your highness really listen?" Su Fengnian said calmly, "Let's hear it first. You, Shifu, are not Yan Wenluan or Qin Yinchue, the famous generals of the spring and autumn period. You are also not part of the Su family like Chu Lushan and Yuan Suozong, who have made great contributions. You do not have the right to make this king listen to whatever you say." Shifu sighed and said slowly, "In my opinion, the 10,000 cavalry of the king is not like a cup of water on a burning cart of firewood. But it may be beneficial to the situation of Lu province. It is no different from the situation of Beiliang. If I were the king, I would be more thorough. I would let the 2 deputy generals of Lingzhou, Wang Ji and Huang Xiaoqui lead the troops. With the Yanxia commandant, Jiao Wui and the other commandants as the main force, not only would the cavalry of Liangzhou enter Lu province to solve the urgent situation, but I would also decisively send the cavalry of Lingzhou north to Lu province. After defeating Lu Gui's army on the western front of Beimang, they would quickly fill the gap outside Liangzhou Pass and south of Huaiyang Pass." Shifu suddenly felt the killing intent of the young king. He said calmly, "Originally, I did not know the situation. But since I came to Tianjing Ranch and heard about the number of horses in this ranch, Shifu can more or less guess the plan of the king and the Protectorate General. There is no need for the king to think too much about it." Su Fengnian nodded. He squatted down and pulled out a piece of licorice and chewed it. Shifu continued, "In the final analysis, in the Battle of Liangmang, outside Liangzhou Pass, Liuzhou, and Yuzhou, there will be victories and defeats. But the place that really decides the survival of Beiliang is only outside Liangzhou Pass. If we lose here, Beiliang will also lose the general trend of Beiliang that the great general and the king worked so hard to accumulate for 2 generations. In the spring and autumn period, there were many ridiculous battles where the great general won a great battle but caused the king's country to perish. Before the final outcome of the Battle of West Wall was decided, everyone was optimistic about West Chu, who had won a series of small victories. However, the great general wanted to complete the siege of West Wall at the cost of rapidly consuming his troops. He did not hesitate to use a few troops in an important but not critical battle to lure most of the elites of West Chu to attack, just to create a small gap in the defense of West Wall. The Battle of Princess Tomb that Commander Yuan shone brilliantly is a clear proof. Su Fengnian suddenly stood up, "General Shi, I'll leave these 10,000 cavalry to you. In 3 days at the latest, you'll take them to Liuzhou to reinforce Qingsang City and Longxiang Army." Shifu was stunned on the spot. He did not understand why he could take on such a great responsibility, and also wondered why Su Fengnian did not personally lead the army. Su Fengnian spat out the chewed grass root and said in a low voice, "I received news this morning that Huda City has fallen. Beimang's army is pressing on Huaiyang, Liuya, and Fuling towns." Shifu's expression changed greatly, and he said in shock, "How could Huda City fall so quickly?" Su Fengnian turned and looked to the north. "Dongjua is a madman. Previously, he would send people to dig a tunnel every few days to their deaths. There were 16 tunnels, and as a result, 5,000 people died. However, no one would have thought that this guy did not dig 16 secret tunnels at all, but a total of 38. 12 of them only dug to the outside of the city, and then with the cooperation of the ground siege." Su Fengnian did not say anything else. Shifu muttered, "This madman, this son of AB*TCH. Su Fengnian turned and said to Shifu, "I'm going to Huaiyang Pass immediately. Shifu, from now on, you'll regain your position as general of Liangzhou. Not only the 10,000 cavalry, all the Lingzhou cavalry that will enter Liangzhou will be under your command." Shifu exhaled heavily, and cupped his fists, "As you wish." Chapter 1574. Su had never thought that he would be able to live a life of both money and leisure. He still remembered that when he grew up in the small town of Beimang, he was only idle and idle. But after coming to Nanzhou, especially after this old man Zhao had formed an alliance with a certain white-clothed man. His life truly began to flourish. He lived in a summer residence that was said to have once belonged to the former Nanzhao royal family. He ate delicacies of all kinds, and even the latrine was more luxurious than the place he had lived in before. Occasionally, there would be guests in the night, each of them more frightening than the last. Su Su had seen 6 or 7 of the old nobles who had survived the old Nanzhao. More and more unfamiliar faces appeared around this old man Zhao, especially those old men who were about the same age as this old man Zhao, and liked to add something like minister or assistant minister in front of their names. Almost every time they saw Su Su, they would weep uncontrollably. Su Su knew that these people should be the old officials of the previous Western Shu dynasty who had come after hearing the news. According to what this old man Zhao had said, Su Su should listen more and speak less. He should only silently cry with these old people. If he really could not cry, he should first rub a handful of Nanzhao's special little sparrow pepper powder on his palm and pretend to lower his head to wipe away his tears. Once he wiped away his tears, it would be hard not to cry even if he did not want to. Su Su had tried it once, and did not want to try it a second time. His eyes were so red and swollen that they did not recover for 2 or 3 days. But at that time, the effect was obvious. In any case, he had moved the group of old officials of Western Shu to tears. The oldest one even fainted on the spot from crying. Today, Su Su had been thrown by this old man Zhao into a library called Mu Gong Lu. He did not want him to really read for pleasure. He only needed to pretend to cultivate his body and mind in the library. Su Su took advantage of the fact that no one was watching and sat on the railing of the tall building. Beside him stood the blind female zither player, Xue Songguan. After the 2 of them had almost died at the hands of Chen Jibao, Su Su no longer pestered the blind zither player to play the game of young hero and demon. It was probably that once bitten, twice shy. He was somewhat afraid of the so-called Jianghu. These days, Xue Songguan had been helping this old man Zhao with the matter of the 18 tribes of Nanzhao. She was very busy and had traveled to almost half of Nanzhao's territory. Su Su missed her very much. But when they really met again, he did not know what to say. The man and woman were silent like this. Su Su raised his head and finally spoke slowly. In the past, I loved to dream during the day. I thought that perhaps I was the posthumous child of some important person, or the illegitimate child of a large family that could not be seen in public. Perhaps one day, I would recognize my ancestors and return to the family and become completely rich. Only now do I realize that I really am the crown prince of a country. It is a pity that my dream has come true. Only now do I realize that even if I were the dragon robe, even if I really am the crown prince, I do not look like one. Fortunately, the old master had taught me a lot about the ways of the rich and powerful in the past year, such as the Tang Dynasty tablet, the Qingtian yellow jelly, the banana leaf blue flower, and a bunch of other things. I don't know why, but I've always liked valuable things since I was young. But are these things valuable enough? Looking at them, in the beginning, I was very excited and wanted to hug them to sleep. But later, I became less and less spirited. How should I put it? It's like a poor boy rolling in the mud. One day, he foolishly married a beautiful wife. It's not that he didn't like her, but that he understood that in the end, he would not be able to protect her. She would have to leave him one day. The young zither player who had accompanied Su Su and Zhao Dingxiu from Beimang to Nanzhao was blind, but her heart was connected. She smiled gently and said, "The Su family has been the ruler of Western Shu for a full 200 years. Although it was lost to your father for 20 years, with this old man Zhao Dingxiu's assistance and the promise of the king of Shu, then this family property actually has a chance to be protected." Just like what Chen Jibao said, in the future, although you cannot be the emperor of Shu, you can at least be the king of Liangshu. Like this, it can be said that you have not let down the ancestors of your Su family. Su Su sighed and said, if not for Su Fengnian finding us in Beimang, how could I possibly be where I am today? The books say that a good bird chooses a tree to nest in. The logic is quite reasonable. But for people like me, logic is never in the books. I can only rely on my fists, or, the crown prince of the previous dynasty, who had escaped from the Western Shu Palace in his infancy, smiled bitterly and pointed at his heart. Or it is here. Although I, Su, have always been at odds with Su Fengnian and have always spoken ill of him in front of you, but you should know that in my life, I only have one friend in Su Fengnian. Of course, what kind of person is Su Fengnian? He is the most powerful king in the world, one of the 4 great grandmasters. He is also so damn handsome, and is known as the Northern Su and the Southern Song. He is also so knowledgeable. Such a rare romantic figure may not necessarily treat me, Su, as a friend. But I really do treat him as a friend. In the end, when I came to Nanzhao, I received a great benefit. It was not easy for me to gain a firm foothold here. Just as I was about to repay him, that expressionless white-clothed man interfered. This old man threw Su Fengnian's Bailiang to one side. I also know that this is something that can't be helped, but in my heart, I really feel bad. Xue Songguan said softly, you said it yourself, this is something that can't be helped. Su fiercely rubbed her cheeks and then held her face with both hands. She said indistinctly, yes, something that can't be helped. I am a person with no ambition and no real talent. Other than eating, drinking, sleeping, using and acting here every day, what can I do? She hesitated and then sighed. In reality, this old man also does not feel good in his heart. He often goes to drink with your blacksmith uncle to relieve his boredom. Once, he got drunk and lost his composure. Su put down her hands and placed them on the railing. She said with a bitter smile, I have never blamed this old man. If this old man did not play the role of father and mother and raise me, there would not be me, Su. Furthermore, do you think I do not know what kind of temper the old man has? He is as smelly and hard as a rock in a latrine. If not for me, for the Western Shu dynasty that was long gone, this old man would not act against his will. Xue Songguan nodded. Su suddenly sighed emotionally. I have nothing to do all day, sometimes I feel tired. Then whether it is Su Fengnian, who bears the life and death of 300,000 Bailiang cavalry, or that ambitious king of Shu Qinjibao, do these people really enjoy themselves, or do they also feel tired? The blind zither player shook her head and smiled. I don't know. Su turned her head and smiled brightly. If one day, I can really put down everything to accompany you in Jianghu, if I tell the new heroes and masters that Su Fengnian used to eat and drink with me, would I have a lot of face? The woman thought of the time when she was in Beimang and almost killed the young king in the rainy alley. She smiled. I can't have any more face. Su's smile was intoxicating. Although I am still very jealous of Su Fengnian, there are some people in the world. No matter what, as long as you know them, you can't hate them. Isn't that right? The blind zither player smiled and did not speak. Su carefully asked, you really don't like him? To tell you the truth, if I were a woman, I am afraid that I would not be able to forget him. She said helplessly, why would I like him? Because Su Fengnian looks handsome. But I'm blind. Su scratched her head and felt that there was something wrong with this reason. She leaned on the railing. If we go to Jianghu in the Central Plains in the future, should I play the role of a murderous female devil and you pretend to be a chivalrous young hero? Su looked into the distance and her eyes were firm. No. We are immortal couples. The blind woman blushed for the first time. She turned her head and said softly, Su, I am blind. Su lowered her head and looked at the back of her head. She said gently, I know. The female expert in the Finger Xian realm said softly and timidly, I am older than you. Su Su smiled. I know that too. She turned around and raised her head to look at Su Su. With a faint smile, she said, if in the future when we go to the Jianghu of the Central Plains, where there are countless beauties, and I find out that you have taken a few more glances at the heroines and fairies, I, Shuesong official, will directly kill them. Su Su said resentfully, Whoa. I really didn't know before, but now I know. She smiled sweetly. I lied to you. Su Su put her palm on her forehead. Although I am not blind, I only have you in my eyes. In the back mountains of Beiliang, two old men, Mi Qiong and Peng He, sat in front of a simple thatched cottage. A small stool separated them by some dishes. Then another old man arrived as promised. He carried 2 jars of green ant wine that had been kept in the cellar of the prince's mansion on Mount Qingliang for many years. This old man had a white face and no beard. Whether it was the way he walked or the way he spoke, there was a gloomy air. Mi Qiong and Peng He, as famous scholars of Beiliang, knew this very well. After they became familiar with each other, they never exposed him. This old man surnamed Xiao was a eunuch. As for why he came to Mount Qingliang for retirement, Mi Qiong and Peng He had no interest in finding out. At first, the 2 famous scholars didn't have a good impression of the old man named Xiao Siku. However, after the old eunuch came to the back of the mountain every now and then to give them a hand, and in addition to the fact that Xiao Siku was much older than the ordinary craftsman, his hands and feet were nimble. His speech and elegance were not inferior to the refined scholars, and he was especially meticulous in his work. Over time, the 3 of them were of similar age and became good friends who could sit and drink together. Chapter 1575. Mi Qiong and Peng He smiled and gestured for Zhao Siku to sit down. The 3 old men, whose ages added up to almost 200 years, sat around a stool. The 2 Beiliang calligraphers, who hadn't even had time to change their clothes, were still covered in the fragrance of ink. They each gulped down the wine in their cups and exhaled heavily. Their faces were somewhat gloomy. Zhao Siku was a senior eunuch who had once been in charge of the Directorate of Credentials in the Liyang Imperial Palace. Although he had taken off the red python gown that was still extremely eye-catching in the palace, his ability to read people's expressions was still as shrewd and ruthless. However, Zhao Siku didn't say anything. He took a small sip of wine and picked a relatively casual topic to start the conversation. I just came back from the Green Deer Cave Academy. The Yellow Mountain Lord asked me to ask 2 old friends for a few calligraphy pieces. I didn't dare to carelessly agree to it and only said that I would pass on the message. Mi Qiong shook his head. Old Peng and I don't have the leisure to write calligraphy pieces these days. I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint Brother Zhao and the Yellow Mountain Lord. How could Zhao Siku not see that Mi Qiong and Peng He, who had been inscribing tombstones all day long? At this moment, their wrists were still trembling as they raised their cups. Their mental and physical exertion was nothing more than this. So he smiled and said, It's fine, it's fine. The Yellow Mountain Lord has already said that this matter isn't urgent. He can wait. He can wait a few years or even 10 years. Peng He smiled. As long as His Highness chases away the Beimang barbarians, let alone 3 or 4 calligraphy pieces, even 30 or 40 would be personally delivered to the Yellow Mountain Lord's Green Deer Cave Academy. But Brother Zhao, we're not outsiders, so I'll say the ugly words first. Old Me and I have heard that many foreign scholars in the academy are not good people. They criticize our Beiliang's military and political affairs. They always think that if they come to the prince's mansion on Mount Qingliang or the Huayang Pass Protectorate Manor, they can turn the tide. These little bastards don't think that it's easy to just stand there and talk. Just because His Highness is easy to talk to, they can take a mile after taking an inch. Is Huang Chang not going to do anything about it? He shook his head and said, It's not that we can't do anything about it. It's just that if we don't do anything about it, we won't be able to do anything about it. Besides, the scholars in Beiliang have changed a lot compared to when they first came to Beiliang. Occasionally, there will still be some scholars who don't know the gravity of the situation. However, their original intention is for the good of Beiliang. Many of the young people who came to Beiliang with the mentality of moving trees and people alive in mind have unknowingly considered themselves to be Beiliang people. This is a great thing. Me, who had once smashed his precious inkstone in front of Su Fengnian, grunted in agreement. The seeds of learning, the seeds of learning. These young people have truly taken root and sprouted in Beiliang. Sooner or later, our Beiliang will also have towering trees that the scholars of the Central Plains look up to. It will become a towering scholar forest. Peng He raised his cup and paused for a moment. He couldn't help but sigh. I'm just afraid that we won't be able to see that day. Me, who was more emotional, said angrily, let's not talk about Yao Baifeng, who went to the Imperial College in the capital. His morals and knowledge are the best in the world. He is indeed worthy of the title of eminent scholar. Even if he leaves Beiliang, me, still hope that Master Yao can make a name for himself in the imperial court. However, this Yan Jieshi is really a good-for-nothing. He relied on his connections to become a grand secretary and forgot his roots. After it was said that he had a chance to become one of the vice presidents of the next examination, he spread the word that the number of people who are qualified to enter Beiliang for the examination in the capital is going to be cut in half from the usual 40 people in the past. Only 20 people are allowed to participate in the examination. To think that I wrote so many calligraphy pieces and birthday couplets for this old thing in the past. I wish I could chop off my own hands. Peng He sneered. That turtle Yen is just trying to avoid arousing suspicion. Let's count with our fingers. Master Yao of the older generation, Chen Wang and Sun Yin of the younger generation, are all top scholars in the imperial court. Even that assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Jean Lanting, who is also a vice president, is also from Beiliang. Perhaps this time, the reduction of Beiliang's examination quota is a sinister scheme that Yan Jieshi and Jean Lanting, one old and one young, came from Beiliang. Zhao Siku smiled playfully. Don't worry, my two old friends. From my point of view, this time, Beiliang's quota isn't going to be reduced. It's the exact opposite. It's very simple. More and more scholars are entering Beiliang. How can the imperial court not panic? At this time, Yan Jieshi and Jean Lanting's suggestion is just for show. Those high-ranking officials in the center of the imperial court won't accept them. On the contrary, they will increase the quota. Not only that, of these Beiliang scholars coming to the capital for the examination, if nothing unexpected happens, there will be a good number of lucky ones who are doing well in Great Peace City. The imperial court just wants to use this opportunity to tell us, the scholars of Beiliang, that if you learn both civil and martial arts, you can be of use to the imperial family. From now on, the imperial court will not give a low price. Flowers grow in the wall, fragrance grows outside the wall. Peng He paused and gritted his teeth. This imperial court is too shameless. Mi Qiong was even more direct. If I were the prince, I would just stop these scholars and keep the goodies within the family. Zhao Siku shook his head and smiled. Beiliang has never done such a despicable thing since the time of the great general. In the hands of the current prince, he probably still won't do it. Perhaps in the eyes of many Liang officials, this is a stupid thing to do. However, from my point of view, justice is in the hearts of the people. That's enough. Mi Qiong nodded. Yes, justice is in the hearts of the people. Peng He finished the wine in his cup in one gulp. He gripped the empty cup tightly and said with a hoarse voice, the governor of Tiger Head City, Lu Jinu, is dead. Lieutenant Chu Hanqing is dead. Lieutenant Ma Jili is dead. All the infantry and cavalry in Tiger Head City are dead. Huluku of Yuzhou, Crouching Bao City, Wanha City, Shaoguang City, Qingsang City and Liuzhou. So many places, so many Beiliang frontier army, so many people have died. Does the Liang Imperial Court know? Do the people of the Central Plains know? Peng He put down his cup and hammered his chest with his hand. He choked with sobs. I don't care if they know or not. Mi Qiong and I, these two old farts, have personally engraved the names of so many young Beiliang men. Every day, the white-haired people have to send the black-haired people off. I'm so bored. Zhao Siku, who had once been a pawn of the Zhao family to watch over David Gao Shulu, was silent. Young master, if you didn't die so young, if you could see this scene today, would you regret choosing Chen Jibao back then and not helping Su Fingnian as much as Mr. Li Shan did? It had not yet entered autumn, but Ji Zhou was already in a troubled state. At this time, Kai Nan, the newly appointed Jidushi of the Lianghuai Path, and Han Lin, who later became the administrator, quickly became the focus of discussion in the capital. The officials of the capital were not willing to speak well of this general who had been Gu Jintang's trusted aide in the past. However, the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Han Lin, was a well-known civil official in Great Peace City. Thus, most of the officials of the capital held a sympathetic attitude. They all felt that it was a pity that Sir Han's life was full of misfortune. For some reason, during this period of time, no one mentioned a person surnamed Zhao who had entered the Lianghuai path earlier than Kai and Han. Even though he was the third son of the previous emperor, although he could not compare to the great prince Zhao Wu and the current emperor, his mother was still the legitimate daughter of the Ping family, the leader of the Northern Scholar Group. However, after Zhao Xiong, who had been given the title of King of Han and had taken over Ji Zhou, left the capital, it was like a clay ox entering the ocean. There was no news of him. It had to be said that this third prince had once been a well-known figure in Great Peace City. He had never stopped being a romantic. When Zhao Xiong was at his peak, the four young masters of the capital, led by Wang Yuanran, were still in some corner looking on with envy. Of the 6 sons of the previous emperor, the eldest, Zhao Wu, had taken over Liaodong. He was also the only prince who held the military power of the Tiger Seal. He was given the title of General of the North and assisted General Gu Jiantang and the old king of the northern vassal, Zhao Sui, to guard the north. The second prince, Zhao Wen, had gone to Gongnamdu in the misty rain and lush forests. The fifth prince, Zhao Hong, had been given the title of King of Yu and had taken over the old Dongyue. The sixth prince, Zhao Chen, was still young and had not left the capital yet. There was a lake in the newly built King of Han's residence that Zhao Xiong named Hearing Wave Lake. Everyone knew that there was a Hearing Wave Lake in Beiliang Palace. There was a pavilion in the center of Hearing Wave Lake. It was surrounded by water and there was no bridge. One had to use a lotus-picking boat to cross. In the pavilion, there was a rattan bed and a bamboo table. There were several plump peonies in a vase. Smoke rose from an incense burner. Zhao Xiong, dressed in plain white casual clothes, reclined on the bed with a wine cup in his hand. There was a female servant in front of the king of the northern vassal, holding an ancient book in her hand. There was also a servant girl standing behind Zhao Xiong, fanning him to get rid of the summer heat. Zhao Xiong drank a cup of wine when he read a page of the book. He did not talk to anyone and enjoyed himself. The afternoon passed slowly in the young king of Han's leisure. Zhao Xiong glanced at the sky outside the window. Soon, a servant girl helped him put on his boots. She came to the window and squinted at the motionless figure on the shore of the lake. Zhao Xiong said, "No wonder you can be the youngest general of a province in my dynasty. You really work hard." Zhao Xiong left the pavilion and took the lotus boat back to the shore. After going ashore, he walked to the Ji Zhou general who was in a precarious situation. When the king of the northern vassal approached, the latter cupped his fist and said in a deep voice, "This general, Yuan Tingshan, greets your royal highness, King of Han." Zhao Xiong casually waved his hand and said with a smile, "General Yuan, if you have something to say, just say it." Yuan Tingshan slowly raised his head. He stood on the shore for an entire afternoon, but his eyes were shining. There was no trace of depression on his face, and there was no flattery on his face. "I beg your Royal Highness to write a few bad words on the secret memorial that can reach the Imperial study." Chapter 1576. Zhao Xiong pretended to be surprised and said, "How did General Yuan know that this king has the responsibility to submit secret memorials? And why did this king say bad things about you?" "This king has heard that you, Yuan Tingshan, are in a bad situation. Not only did you not get any benefits from your father-in-law, recently even some of the trusted aides that you managed to win over have gone to Ji Province's Deputy General Han Fang. Even Jidushi Kai has closed his door to you, not to mention Military Commissioner Han. Today, you came to this king's mansion and waited for an entire afternoon. Shouldn't you be waiting for timely help? Why are you adding fuel to the fire? Are you tired of being a general and want to be a prisoner to try something new?" Listening to the king of Han's sarcasm, Yuan Tingshan's expression did not change. He maintained a respectful posture of cupping his fist and bowing. With a sincere tone, he said, "This time, I came to visit with 10,000 taels of gold and 10 chests of calligraphy and paintings." Listening to this young man who was privately scolded as a mad dog by some officials, Zhao Xiong became absent-minded for a moment. For some reason, he thought of a scene. It was a scene that he had never seen with his own eyes, but he had heard of it many times. Many years ago, there was a young general who was similar to this, begging to give gifts to people in the Ministry of War of Liang. Zhao Xiong raised his head to look at the gorgeous sky filled with burning clouds and said to himself, "It's a pity it's not raining." Yuan Tingshan raised his head to look at the obviously absent-minded king of Han. He lowered his head and quietly bit his lips. Of the two fathers-in-law, Great General Gu Jiantang had clearly stated that he would not lend a helping hand to the rotten situation in Ji Province. As for the Li family's Yanbao, they had also vaguely revealed that the nearly 10,000 private cavalry of the Li family was the last of the family's assets. They would not be given to him, the son-in-law, to be squandered. Even if the 10,000 private cavalry were to fight, they would only fight in Ji Province. If permitted, they would even move to the north of Gangnam-do. They would definitely not let Yuan Tingshan bring them to the border of Ji Province to fight to the death with Beimang. As a result, the Ji Prefecture General's residence, which was originally flourishing with each passing day, was now plagued by both internal and external problems. However, Yuan Tingshan didn't care about these things. He could even take a step back in his official career and give up his position as Ji Province's general. However, Yuan Tingshan was extremely wary of one person. That was the young emperor sitting on the dragon throne in Great Peace City. Yuan Tingshan was afraid that he would become a useless general in the eyes of this ambitious emperor. Once this fatal impression was formed in the emperor's mind, it would be meaningless even if Yuan Tingshan won 100 battles. Therefore, Yuan Tingshan came to beg the king of Han Zhao Xiong, begging him to impeach him in the secret memorial. Only in this way could the young emperor feel that the entire Ji province, from top to bottom, was rejecting Yuan Tingshan, like a lonely official in the imperial court. Only then would he have the chance to rise again. Gold. This king's surname is Zhao. Does he lack such things? Antique calligraphy and paintings. This king has personally touched more things in his life than you, Yuan Tingshan, have seen. Zhao Xiong patted Yuan Tingshan's shoulder. Therefore, Yuan Tingshan, in the future, when you have a meteoric rise, don't forget who it was that helped you when you were at the end of your rope. Yuan Tingshan's left hand tightly gripped the back of his right hand, his veins bulging. I swear I will never forget. Zhao Xiong bent down slightly and said softly in Yuan Tingshan's ear, in reality, no matter if you are a general in Ji province or going to Guangling province to lead troops to quell a rebellion, in someone's heart, you are not worthy of his trust. Only when your father-in-law is dead will you have the chance to rise up. These words are this king's return gift to you." Yuan Tingshan's body trembled. Zhao Xiong seemed to be slightly tired. He waved his hand and said, "You can go. This king won't send you off." Yuan Tingshan continued to bend his back and took a few steps back before turning and leaving. Zhao Xiong looked at that back and said with a smile, "You're looking down on my third brother too much." "Yes, you're also looking down on me, Zhao Xiong." "Fine, I'll help you this time." Jiangnan Yangzhou had a scenic spot called the Scattered Flower Terrace. The mountain was not high, but there were no mountains within 100 miles, making it stand out. It was said that in the Dafeng dynasty, there was an enlightened monk who preached here, causing fairies to scatter flowers and rocks to nod their heads. In the twilight, the famous people of Gangnam-do gathered their friends and gathered at the Scattered Flower Terrace to admire the moonlight. Everyone brought their own cushions, wine, tea, chopsticks, incense burners, rice, and other things. They lined up on the peak of the mountain. Tonight, there were 900 people on the mountain. Under the guidance of a famous person, they stood up and loudly recited, "My generation's writings are as high as the white snow." Close to 1,000 people sang the famous poem, A Journey to Jiangnan. For a moment, the sound was like thunder and the wine flowed like a spring. Late at night, the pure white moonlight shone on the Scattered Flower Terrace. Chapter 1577. Among them was Lu Daolin, who had resigned from his post as the Minister of Rites a few years ago. He was the old master of the Lu family at Lake Pavilion. At the same time, he was the older brother of the former Minister of War, Lu Baijie. In a short 10 years, the Lu family had produced 2 ministers. It was indeed worthy of the former emperor's praise of, "The Lu family's children are a dazzling array of dazzling jewels." Although Lu Daolin had retired to the mountains and forests and Lu Baijie had quietly left the capital, it did not diminish the Lu family's transcendent status in Jiangnan that suppressed the other 3 families. There was also the old head of the Su family, Su Yinxing. After his eldest son, Su Gong, was conferred the title of Longxiang General, this old man peacefully lived out his remaining years. Although a few years ago, Su Shufei suffered an unexpected mishap and was banished to the Changchun Palace, causing the entire Su family to suffer a great loss, fortunately Su Gong did not disappoint. He entered the capital to serve as the assistant minister of the Ministry of War and supported the family. Su Yinxing, who had previously closed his door and refused to receive guests, finally appeared. Sitting beside the old man was his youngest daughter, Su Huipong. Dressed as a yellow-crowned Daoist nun, she and Tangxi's sword Immortal Lu Baijie had a grudge that was not fated to be together. Everyone in the Jiangnan Taoist forest knew about it. The middle-aged Confucian scholar, Yuan Jiangyan, was not only the mainstay of the Yuan family, but also a famous talker. Beside the old man with the white cat on his lap sat a spirited young man. He lowered his head and bent his waist, gently waving the folding fan in his hand. However, he was not fanning his family's ancestor, but the lazy white cat. Behind the young man stood a green-robed swordsman who did not touch a drop of wine. When everyone was drunk, he was the only sober one. The 4 Gangnam-do families, the Lu family, the Yu family, the Yuan family, and the Gumu Su family were the main forces in the south that contended against the scholars in the north. Once, the Green Party in Qingzhou was a natural ally of the 4 families. Unfortunately, they were not successful and were easily destroyed by the former Minister of War, Zhang Julu. Although the 4 surnames fought over every detail in the Jiangnan circuit, and generation after generation continuously fought both openly and covertly, in Great Peace City, in the imperial court of Liang, the 4 surnames were incomparably united. Su Gong was able to enter the capital from a local place and forcefully take down the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, the elderly head of the Yu family who raised a white cat, and Yu Jiankong, who had not hesitated to personally make a trip to the capital, were all extremely important. Su Yinxing looked at Yu Jiankong, who was a generation older than him, and sighed softly, "Elder Yu, chaos is everywhere now. Take Yuan Guo for example. He finally made a comeback and became the Minister of Revenue in charge of money, but in just a few days, he was sent to Guangling Circuit next door to us to be a provincial governor. Because it is under the jurisdiction of a vassal king, he is only a deputy. If it weren't for the Grand Chancellor and Tantanon speaking up for Tang Shi and suppressing it, it probably wouldn't have been Kai Nan but Tang Shi who would have been the provincial governor of Lianhui. Elder Yu, although Tang Shi is still the Minister of War, His Majesty has clearly moved his mind to change the position. In Elder Yu's opinion, where should Tang Shi go from here? We also have a target and can plan for the long term. Yu Jiankong smiled and pointed at Lu Daolin. The minister's brother is not in a hurry, so why are you, Su Yinxing, in a hurry? Lu Daolin said helplessly, "It's not that I'm not in a hurry, it's that there's no use in being in a hurry." Fortunately, Kai Nan has already gone to Lianhui Circuit and Yuan Guo has gone to Guangling Circuit. As long as Tang Shi isn't sent to Nanjiang, she probably won't be doing too badly. Yu Jiankong stroked the white cat's head and said calmly, "In the past, there was a battle between civil and military officials from the capital to the ground. Now, both sides have become a thing of the past. Next will be the battle between North and South. Grand Chancellor Qi of Zhongshu Province is a classic southerner. Deputy Zhao Yuling is a southerner. Tantanon is a northerner. Chen Wang is a Bailiang. They have fought to a draw. Let's count the 6 ministries of the Minister of State. The new Minister of Appointments, Yin Mao Chen, is a southerner. The 2 successive Ministers of Revenue, Wang Xiongui and Yuan Guo are all southerners. If we add in Lu Daolin, the former Minister of Rights, and Lu Baijie, the current Minister of War, don't you feel that there are too many of us southern scholars at the front of the court? In this way, if Su Gong is allowed to take control of the Ministry of War and the former Assistant Minister of Justice, Han Lin, takes over as Minister of Justice, how will the northern scholars survive in the future? Moreover, the number of scholars in recent years has been dominated by southerners. Thus, Han Lin went to Jizhou and Yuan Guo went to Guangling Circuit. These are all reasonable matters. There is no need to make a fuss. In the future, even if Tang Taizhuang becomes the Minister of War, Su Gong can only continue to be an assistant minister for another 4 or 5 years. There is nothing strange about it. Yu Jiankong paused and smiled. What is interesting is that there is a new power in Taiyan City that cannot be underestimated. Grand Scholar Yan Jieshi, Left Chancellor Yao Baifeng of the Imperial College, Chen Wang of the Minxia Province, Assistant Minister of Rights Jean Lanting, Minister of Yellow Gate Yan Qiji, and the temporarily dormant Sun Yin are all from Beiliang without exception. However, they all have good reputations in the officialdom. There are not many of them, but each of their words carry a lot of weight, especially that Chen Wang. He is an extraordinary person. Even compared to Bai Yan's career back then, he is not inferior in any way. This is somewhat similar to the Green Party that interfered between Zhang Lu and Gu Lu. However, compared to the Green Party, this group of officials that can barely be called the Cold Party have never formed a party. Have you all noticed that although these people all come from Beiliang, their loyalty to His Majesty is something that none of the other civil and military officials in the imperial court can compare to? In the future, I am guessing that Chen Wang, whose future is limitless, will lead them and form a tripartite balance of power with us northern and southern scholars. Yuan Jiangyan sighed ruefully, could it be another Bai Yan? Yu Jiankong shook his head and said, I'm afraid it's more than that. Lu Daolin raised his head and gazed at the moonlit night, lost in thought. For some reason, Su Huipu's expression was rather sorrowful. Perhaps she was thinking of Sword Immortal Tang Shi who was far away in the capital, or perhaps she was thinking of a certain woman surnamed Su who liked to wear red and was already separated by yin and yang. Yu Jiankong smiled slightly and said, what our 4 families need to do now is take a step back. If Liaodong's Ping clan and the other northern families want to seize the seats in the capital at this time, we will pretend to be reluctant and give them all to them. As for when we will take a step forward, it's very simple. Wait until the Ping clan and the others are full of people. At the same time, we must wait until Qin Wang, Sun Yin, Fan Zhongho, and the others have truly matured before we act. Right now, let those northern barbarians and those young people have their own conflicts. They might be able to make things difficult for those juniors in the next few years, but sooner or later, they will suffer greatly. In this period of time, you people should take a step back. It's not like you really don't care about anything. You might as well add flowers to the brocade for those young people of Great Peace City who have a bright future. Help them make a name for themselves in the literary world, boost their reputation, and occasionally sing poems. Treat it as sowing good karma. Yuan Jiangyan laughed and said, "What's so hard about that?" Then Yu Jiankong did a strange action. He raised his wine cup, turned to face the northwest, and toasted from a distance. I, Yu Jiankong, represent the Central Plains in toasting your Bailiang. Toasting you and your father. Chapter 1578. Since the end of the Yonghui era, the Yamen of the 3 provinces and 6 ministries of Liang, big and small, had changed drastically. Senior officials such as Zhang Julu, Minister of War Gu Jiantang, and this old man of the Song family had either died or left the center of the capital. A group of people led by the head of the Secretariat, Qi Yanglong, had ascended to high positions in the imperial court. Among them, there were seniors like Qin Wang, the left-scattered cavalry of Minxia province, as well as young scholars like Li Jifu, Wu Zongxian, and Gao Tingshu, who had become famous in the Xiangfu Yuanyan imperial examination, whose qualifications were far inferior to Qin Xiaobao's. Tang Taihuang and Su Gong had also become assistant ministers. Among the old officials of the cabinet, there were also a lot of changes. A large number of Yonghui officials, including Zhao Yuling and Yin Mao Chen, had almost all changed their official positions. Yuan Gua, Han Lin, and Wang Xiongui had all been transferred to other places and became nominal border officials. Among them, only Huan Wen was an anomaly. As an old official of 3 dynasties, no matter how the officials of the same dynasty changed, Tantanon had always been in charge of Minxia province. Although it was rumored that he was not feeling well and had to make room for the second-in-command of the Secretariat, Zhao Yuling, or Yin Mao Chen, the heavenly official of the Ministry of Personnel, to the civil and military officials of Great Peace City, as long as His Majesty did not give an explicit order, Tantanon was still the dominant figure who had great influence on the entire imperial court. Even if Huan Wen really retired, as the only remaining senior official and literary leader of the Liang dynasty, the political affairs of Liang would inevitably be handled by this old man who was praised as the national treasure by the late emperor. No wonder the Huan family in Great Peace City would tease them out of kindness. As autumn approached this year, the emperor asked the imperial household department to carefully craft more than 40 ink slabs with auspicious talisman engraved on them and gave them to the important officials. Those who received them all thought that they were treasures. Only Huan Wen received 3 slabs. Even Qi Yanglong, Yan Jieshi, and Qin Wang only received 2 slabs. Moreover, not only did Huan Wen receive this honor, but he also received an old ginseng that could be said to be the best among all the tributes in Liaodong and a jar of Chunling wine. As a result, the private discussions that speculated that Tantanon might not be able to survive the 2nd year of the auspicious talisman vanished in an instant. Following the rise of the 2 provinces under the Hall of Secretaries and the relocation of the Hanlin Academy to a new location, as well as the establishment of the 6 pavilions, a large number of important civil officials were sent out. The Zhao family, which was originally a gathering of Yamen offices, lived up to the grand occasion of all the officials of the imperial court gathered here in the early years. On the first day of autumn, the emperor specially opened the Golden Autumn Garden, which occupied the largest area and had the best scenery among the 4 imperial gardens, and held a grand banquet for all the officials. Before the banquet began, the young emperor, who was quite interested, even set a new rule for Liang to welcome autumn. He had the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, Song Tonglu, bring in a pot of Chinese parasol tree that had been planted long ago. When the time came, he had Qin Wang temporarily act as the grand historian and loudly shout, "Autumn is coming." Then, the emperor personally plucked a piece of Chinese parasol tree leaf, implying that the emperor represented the common people in reporting to the heavens for autumn. In this impromptu and elegant matter that had no precedent, Qin Wang, who became the first, reporting to the emperor to welcome autumn, of Liang, was undoubtedly the most eye-catching. Empress Yan Dongwu stood together with her younger brother Yan Qiji. After seeing this scene, this moving woman, who was the mother of the nation, said softly to her younger brother, "You must strive to become the person to report to the emperor for autumn next year." Yan Qiji, who was most afraid of being in the limelight, said with a headache, "Sister, what is there to fight about this kind of thing? Besides, I can't fight for it. With Qin Shaobao in front, next year, probably only the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Jean Lanting, or the new chancellor of our Hanlin Academy can take on this role. Otherwise, Song Kelly, Fan Zhongho, and the others would be more justified than me." Yan Dongwu glanced at the civil and military officials with different expressions. The older ones, like Qi Yanglong and Huan Wen, were, after all, old and had reached the top of the court. There was no need for them to add flowers to the brocade. Therefore, they all had an indifferent attitude towards this matter and did not want to fight with the younger generation. However, the younger generation of officials, such as Xiao Yuling and Yin Mao Chen, were slightly different. They also did not need to fight for anything and were not suitable. However, when they looked at Qin Wang, who was a generation lower in seniority, there was still a hint of envy in their eyes. As for Gao Tingshu, Wu Tsongxian, and the other young people who had just made a name for themselves in the court of Liang, all of them had burning gazes. These years, Jean Lanting, who had been successful in Great Peace City, was unperturbed. It seemed that he already saw the person to report to the emperor for autumn next year as something in the bag. Yan Dongwu, who now had the bearing of a phoenix, did not look sideways. She did not whisper to her beloved younger brother and said with an indifferent expression, "Your brother-in-law needs you to fight for it. However, he will not say anything to you directly. However, if you have the heart to improve, he will be very happy." Yan Qiji sighed helplessly and said, "All right, then I will do my best." Yan Dongwu looked out of the corner of his eye at his father, Yan Jieshi, who was chatting happily with Wen Shuren, the Grand Secretary of the Hall of Martial Meritocracy, and the other court officials. He changed to an unquestionable tone and said, "Our father has already helped you pave the way." The 6 Grand Secretaries of the Hall of Martial Meritocracy, plus the 6 newly established Grand Secretaries of the Hall of Martial Meritocracy, these 12 people will be the most noble court officials of our dynasty in the future. You are still young and do not have enough experience. You do not have the extravagant hope that our Yan family will have 2 Grand Secretaries, but it will not be difficult for you to become a Grand Secretary of the Hall of Martial Meritocracy in 10 to 20 years. Moreover, Grand Secretaries of the Hall of Martial Meritocracy are an empty title, and will not be taken away just because an official leaves the court. In addition, in a few years, if nothing unexpected happens, father will be promoted from the Hall of Martial Meritocracy to the Hall of Martial Meritocracy. Yan Qiji said timidly, "Sister, in the end, we are relatives. Shouldn't we avoid arousing suspicion?" Yan Dongwu turned his head expressionlessly, but there was clearly some anger in his eyes. He directly interrupted his brother's words and said in a low voice, "Can you really not see the undercurrent in the court? Even you, the brother-in-law, are not helping your brother-in-law. Do you want to place your hopes on those civil officials who are becoming better and better at being officials?" Yan Qiji wanted to speak but stopped. In the end, he lowered his head and admitted his mistake. The emperor walked over to the side of the brother and sister. Seeing Yan Qiji's embarrassed state, he smiled and joked, "What is it, brother-in-law? Were you scolded by your sister again? Every time Grand Secretary Yen sees me and occasionally mentions you, his son, it is always difficult to hide his proud smile. Your sister, on the other hand, scolds him every time she sees him. I can't help but feel indignant for you. No matter, no matter. Since your sister is not close to you, I am very close to you, the brother-in-law. In the future, if you are wronged by your sister, feel free to come and complain to me. We can drink together to relieve our boredom. Yen Dongwu smiled gently and asked, What troubles does your majesty have to relieve? The young emperor, who had been caught red-handed, was immediately speechless. This made Yen Qiji, who was watching the fire from the other side, feel even more amused. The Emperor Zhao Zhuan reached out and pointed at his brother-in-law, who was rejoicing in his misfortune. Ungrateful. I accidentally got into trouble because I wanted to help you. If a normal subject heard the words ungrateful from the mouth of an emperor, they would probably be scared out of their wits. It was unknown if Yen Qiji was too slow or what, but he was not nervous at all and smiled apologetically. Although the young emperor snorted coldly on the surface, in the depths of his heart, he was not angry at his brother-in-law's arrogance. Instead, he felt very comfortable. If they were not family, they would not be so casual. Although the emperors of the previous dynasties called themselves emperors. Which emperor really liked the feeling of being alone? Yen Dongwu suddenly said in a low voice, Your Majesty, the matter of the palace serving girls cannot be delayed any longer. Zhao Zhuan quickly laughed and then found an excuse to go find the head of the secretariat to discuss military matters. Chapter 1579. After the banquet, the emperor allowed the officials to tour the Golden Autumn Garden on their own. Thus, the civil and military officials spread out in groups of 2s and 3s. They seemed to be careless, but there were many things to pay attention to. For example, Qi Yanglong and Huan Wen, the two big shots of the court, walked side by side. Zhao Yiling of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, who had resigned from the Ministry of Personnel, pulled 5 or 6 officials with him. The current heavenly official, Yin Mao Chen, chatted happily with the group of Hanlin Academy scholars. A few newly appointed scholars with shaky foundations naturally walked hand in hand. After the death of the blue-eyed girl, the 6 officials of the Shangshu province, who had been leaderless, also had their own positions and did not stick together. Zhao Shixuan, on the other hand, stuck together. The assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Tang Taihuang, walked with 2 great generals of the same generation as his benefactor, Gu Jiantang. One of them was the great general Zhao Qing, who had not paid attention to worldly affairs for many years, and the other was Yang Shenxing, whose face had been covered in dirt for the past 2 years. On the other hand, the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Liu Baijie, walked with the young officials from Jiangnan. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Wen Tai, and the former general of Qingzhou, Hong Lingshu, who had recently been summoned to the capital, had just made it clear that they would not interact with each other for the rest of their lives. Today, they met again. It looked like they had buried the hatchet and were on good terms with each other. It was hard not to wonder if the Green faction was going to make a comeback. As for the 2 Liao families in the north, led by the Peng and Lu families, the people in charge of the Great Peace City also stayed together. Qi Yanglong and Huan Wen, these 2 old men, did not walk slowly. Their steps were large, so they walked further and further away from the group of officials behind them. The 2 old men came directly to a famous spot in the Golden Autumn Garden. It was the Spring God Mountain built from nearly 100 pieces of Spring God Lake stone. Although the Spring God Lake stone had long been loved and revered by some famous scholars of Jiangnan, it was only in the past 5 years that it had truly become popular and known to all levels of society. Piece by piece, the stone was continuously picked up from the bottom of the lake. Last year, it even flew into the royal family and became a mountain overnight in the Golden Autumn Garden, becoming famous under heaven. The Spring God Lake stone was known to be thin and wrinkled. It was a high-quality spring god lake stone, was exquisite and had a natural aura. So it was said to be one gene of 1 or 2 tails of gold. Huanwen did not climb the mountain. Instead, he stood a few dozen steps away from the spring god lake mountain and gazed at the short mountain that was said to be shrouded in mist. The sound of rain could be heard on rainy days, and the sound of conches could be heard in strong winds. Seeing that Tantanon had no intention of climbing the mountain, the head of the secretariat, Qianglong, smiled and accompanied Tantanon where he stood. The atmosphere in Liang Imperial Court was very relaxed. Compared to the confrontation between Zhang and Gu, when Zhang Julu and Gu Jiantang, these two serious civil and military leaders, were present, the civil and military officials could be said to be trembling with fear of making mistakes. Now that it was the good-tempered Qi Yanglong and Huanwen, everyone was much more relaxed. In addition, they had coincidentally met Zhao Zhuan, a young emperor who had just ascended the throne and could not be considered to have accumulated great power. Therefore, the senior officials of Great Peace City liked to tease the younger generation that they were on good terms with. Compared to them, the old officials of Yonghui, they had met at a good time. Tantanon, who had drunk a lot at the banquet, burped. He turned to Qi Yanglong and asked with a smile, "Head of the Secretariat, do you know the origin of my nickname, Huanwen, Tantanon?" Qi Yanglong smiled and shook his head. Huanwen laughed and said, "In the beginning, I wasn't called Tantanon. There was a guy who gave me the nickname of Wine Gourd. If I angered him, he would scold me as a wine bag and a good-for-nothing. The name Tantanon was something that happened much later. There was one time when I was on duty with that guy in the forbidden area. I couldn't control my mouth and secretly drank some wine. It just so happened that I was caught red-handed by the previous emperor, who had been reading books all night. I drank too much and spoke without restraint. I told the previous emperor that as long as I, Huanwen, had wine in my stomach, I would be magnanimous. However, if there was a day when His Majesty did not give me wine to drink, I would be full of complaints." The previous emperor was amused and immediately had the head eunuch, Han Xingxian, bring over several jars of wine. At that time, there was a guy who had never touched wine who drank a cup for the first time. His face was as red as a monkey's butt. After I was drunk, I laughed at him and told him not to call himself Green Eyes, just Red Face. He replied, "Shut your mouth and be a good Tantanon." It was probably from that time onwards that I became the Tantanwang. Perhaps many officials felt that this nickname meant that I, Huanwen, was a tumbler in Liang's officialdom. No matter how turbulent the court was, would always sway along with it, but in the end, I never fell. Qi Yanglong sighed and said, "Whether as a person or an official, Tantanon has never done anything that his heart could not get over. I'm not as good as Tantanon." Huanwen rolled his eyes and said, "Head of the Secretariat, your words are too much of a bootlicker. If it were someone else who said it, I would even think that they were scolding him." Qi Yanglong smiled but did not say anything. He was in charge of the Secretariat of the Liang dynasty, which had been neglected for many years. A few decades ago, the Zhao clan of the old Liang dynasty, which was located in the northern lands and was divided by the vassal towns, had bestowed the titles of head of the Secretariat, left and right servant archers, and shizhong to the vassal towns' military generals who were too powerful to get rid of and the valiant military officials who controlled the court to show their favor. They were all empty titles, just like the Great Pillar State and the Great Pillar State later. However, today was different from the past. The Secretariat of the Secretariat, which had lost a lot of power, became a veritable important place of the court again. Qi Yanglong also took the opportunity to become the next Grand Secretary after Zhang Julu. Some of the power that had been taken away by the Hanlin Academy long ago also returned to the Secretariat of the Secretariat. However, Qi Yanglong was well aware that as the head of the Secretariat, who was summoned to the capital to put out the fire, in the end, he was just a transitional prime minister. After helping Yi Mao-chen, Zhao Yuling, and the others to ascend to the throne, he had to retreat unscathed. However, Huanwen was different. Whether it was the former emperor or the current emperor, they all regarded this Tantanon, who had a good personal relationship with Zhang Julu, as a trustworthy teacher of the emperor. Qi Yanglong was very clear about the hubbub of Huan Wen's resignation this time. It was not that the young emperor was afraid of Huan Wen, but that Huan Wen himself had the intention to retire. That was why there was such a beautiful story that Huan Wen alone received 3 imperial inkstones. Huan Wen said softly, "Young people should be busy. When they are busy, they can shake off the floating air. Old people should be idle. Only when they are idle can they enjoy the rest of their lives." Qi Yanglong shook his head and said in a low voice, "At this time, everyone in the court can be idle except for Tantanon. The Guangling Road, the Beiliang Road, and the Liangliao Road are all not peaceful. The court needs Tantanon to help make decisions. Many times and many things, even if Tantanon does not speak, as long as you sit there, even if you are dozing off, the hearts of the people in the court will not be in chaos. An old man in the family is like a treasure. This is exactly what Tantanon means." Huan Wen continued to look at the small mountain for a while, then slowly turned his head and smiled. "In terms of age and seniority, the head of the secretariat and my teacher are of the same generation." Qi Yanglong quickly waved his hand and said, "Don't give me that. Your teacher and I were famous for not getting along well in the past. As for the conflict between Confucianism and legalism, the two of us could never come to an agreement. After I came to the capital, I was already very lucky that Tantanon did not make things difficult for the Imperial College and the Secretariat." Huan Wen no longer used the head of the Secretariat's respectful and unfamiliar title. He said sincerely, "Although Mr. Qi does not have the same political views as my teacher admired your scholarly skills very much." In Huan Wen's opinion, the reason why people say that it is better to hide in plain clothes than to hide in official clothes is actually a hypocritical way of saying that either one has done enough as an official, or one can't be an official. It is far inferior to Mr. Qi, who can hide in plain clothes and help the world. Qi Yanglong smiled. "Tantanon, oh Tantanon, it is one thing for us 2 old men to flatter each other here, but the problem is that no one is listening to us. How can we pass on and leave our names in history?" Speaking of this, Qi Yanglong said with a hint of sarcasm, "When I was young and studied history, when I first read about someone or something, I always felt that my blood was boiling or moved. Later, when I thought about it, I realized that it was an extreme case of fishing for fame. Their intentions are punishable." Huan Wen laughed heartily. "Mr. Qi, you are right. I also had the same feeling when I was young." Qi Yanglong sighed for no reason. The writer of the past, the flipper of the future. Huan Wen also sighed and suddenly asked, "Mr. Qi, have you never met that Su Fengnian?" Qi Yanglong nodded. "That king of Beiliang has been to Shangyin Academy, but unfortunately, I have never met him." Huan Wen laughed and said, "My teacher and the old King Liang have scolded each other many times. As a student, although I have only met the young king twice, the feeling is really not enough for outsiders to know." Qi Yanglong said in a bad mood, "What's there to show off?" Huan Wen smiled happily and hard, not hiding his mischievous meaning. Huan Wen asked again, "Mr. Qi, do you know the 2 things I like to do the most since I became an official in the capital?" Qi Yanglong replied, "I'd like to hear the details." Tantanon narrowed his eyes. First, he raised his left arm and waved his sleeve. Then, he stretched out his right hand and gently tapped in the air with his index and middle fingers together. "Every day in the court, I watch civil and military officials come and go, dazzling and dazzling. I listen to the jade pendants on their waists tapping, tinkling, tinkling, crisp and pleasant to the ear. I'll never get tired of watching and listening." Qi Yanglong laughed and said, "I didn't feel it before, but I have to pay attention to it in the future." Huan Wen raised his head, not looking at the mountain, but at the higher sky. Heaven and earth are like a big jade plate. Large and small beads fall into it, crackling and shattering. They all die. Qi Yanglong closed his eyes and tilted his head slightly, as if listening attentively. He murmured, "Yes, the most brilliant bead in the world in the northwest is finally about to shatter. You and me, and those yellow and purple high lords behind us, are the culprits." Huanwen laughed and said, "We are the scholars who are ashamed of the classics." Qi Yanglong still closed his eyes and laughed softly. It turns out that the real scholars don't read books. Chapter 1580. The sudden fall of Huda City allowed the northern Mang army to unfold an extremely comfortable offensive posture at the southern end of the Dragon Eye Plain, leading to the emergency of Huaiyang Pass and Liuya and Fuling towns. At this critical moment, the deputy commander of the Northern Liang Infantry Army, Great Ancestor Gu, stood his ground against the opinion of the masses and did not disperse his troops to reinforce the front line. Instead, he gathered in the area of Zhongzhou military town behind Huaiyang Pass and urgently converged with the large border cavalry army led by the deputy commander of the cavalry army Zhou Kong. In this way, Huaiyang Pass and Liuya and Fuling towns, as the base of the Northern Liang Protectorate manor, imperceptibly replaced Huda City as the second Huda City. However, because Chu Lushan, the nominal number 1 commander of the Northern Liang Border Army, insisted on personally guarding Huaiyang Pass, Great Ancestor Gu's action of not lending a helping hand pushed this foreign old general from the old southern Tang to the heart of the storm. Not only the cavalry generals, even the interior of the Border Army infantry system had a lot of complaints about Great Ancestor Gu. Especially after Chen Yinxue, who was also the deputy commander of the infantry army, temporarily led troops from Yuzhou to reinforce Liangzhou province. The 2 northern Liang infantry generals who had the same rank also had a lot of disagreements. In addition, Jean Partridge Zhou Kong himself was a typical aggressive commander in the northern Liang army. For a moment, Great Ancestor Gu was deserted in Zhongzhou military town, and Great Ancestor Gu, as the base of the Northern Liang Protectorate manor, imperceptibly became the second Huda city. However, because Chu Lushan, the nominal number 1 commander of the Northern Liang Border Army, insisted on personally guarding Huaiyang Pass, Great Ancestor Gu's action of not lending a helping hand pushed this foreign old general from the old southern Tang to the heart of the storm. Within Grave 2 military town's temporary general manor discussion hall, another dispute that almost completely tore apart all pretenses erupted. Those officers and captains whose official positions weren't that high were already a bit numb. Right now, Grave Tomb and Huaiyang Pass defensive line behind Tiger Head City had already completely lost contact. Before this, there were already no less than 100 elite crossbowmen who died in battle while delivering military intelligence. In reality, Huaiyang Pass and Liuya Fuling towns could already be considered isolated outside the pass, submerged under Northern Mang Great Army's armored cavalry. In the meeting hall, there were originally more than 10 chairs. Great Ancestor Gu, Zhou Kong, Chen Yinxue who came from afar, Qi Danghua, the commander of the 6,000 Iron Futu Cavalry, Yuan Nanting, the commander of the White Scale Guards, and the others all had their own seats. However, the day before yesterday, Zhou Kong stood up angrily in front of Great Ancestor Gu, kicked a chair and left the meeting hall. Today, Zhou Kong and Great Ancestor Gu had an irreconcilable dispute about the location of Zhongzhou town. This cavalry general, who had the reputation of Brocade Partridge, stood on one side of the table with a sand table. He punched the table with his left hand and pointed at Great Ancestor Gu with his right hand. He said angrily, "Defend. Do you only know how to hide and defend? Is this all you can do, Great Ancestor Gu? I really don't know why His Highness invited you from the Central Plains to our Beiliang frontier army. If it wasn't for the fact that you wrote Collection of Ashes, and if it wasn't for the fact that the great general and Surly praised you endlessly back then, this general would have suspected that you were a spy for the Northern Mang barbarians." Hearing this, not to mention the young generals like Ningame, the deputy general of the Iron Futu Cavalry, who could only be regarded as a rising star compared to the old generals, even the silent Chen Yinxue's eyelids trembled. Zhou Kang's words were obviously too much. Chen Yinxue glanced at Great Ancestor Gu from the corner of his eyes. Great Ancestor Gu was still indifferent. However, Zhou Kong didn't show any sign of mercy. He pointed his finger at great ancestor Gu even more fiercely. Huayang Pass can't be defended if you can't even defend Huda Town. Liuya and Fuling Town rely on the flexibility of the cavalry to actively seek opportunities. Can they defend it? Great ancestor Gu, you are the commander of the infantry, but I am the deputy commander of the Bailiang cavalry. I can't bear to see the tens of thousands of cavalry in Liuya and Fuling Town have to dismount and fight on foot because of your opinion. In the end, they can only die on the city wall. I can't bear to see the tens of thousands of cavalry under my command crowding around the heavy tomb every day, watching their comrades die in the front line every day, but they can't fight. In the end, Zhou Kang's eyes were almost burning with anger. He reprimanded, Great Ancestor Gu, it's fine if you are afraid of death. I don't care if your infantry likes to be cowards. But why do you want our cavalry to wait for death here? Great Ancestor Gu said indifferently, because without the support of Commander Zhou's cavalry, the heavy tomb can't be defended. The city is dead. Without the restraint of the cavalry, there is no city in the world that can't be broken. Similarly, without the cooperation of a stable city, the cavalry is like water without a source. It's not hard to win a few battles, but it's unrealistic to win the entire battle. Zhou Kong sneered, then your infantry should just obediently wait in the heavy tomb. It's enough as long as you cooperate with our cavalry and watch us kill the enemy. This request isn't too much, is it? Right now, Dongzhuo's army has yet to truly gain a foothold, but our cavalry can roam through our own defensive line with our eyes closed. Not to mention charging and attacking, even if it's a night battle, we can fight cleanly and efficiently. The disadvantage in numbers can be made up for by our familiarity with the geography. Great Ancestor Gu, you keep saying that you want to wait for news from the two battlefields of Qingcang City and Xiaoguang City in Yuzhou, and that it's best to delay until the new city on the border of Liangzhou is built. But for better or for worse, you are someone who has led troops in battle. How can you not know the principle of fleeting opportunities on the battlefield? What, you can't be thinking that after Protector General Chu dies at Huayang Pass, you can go to that new city and become the next Protector General, right? Great Ancestor Gu's expression did not change. He only stared at this Bailiang's third-in-command who spoke without thinking. He slowly said, Zhou Kong, there is no joking in the army. There are some words that I can tolerate, but there are some words that can't be treated as a fart. Zhou Kong narrowed his eyes and laughed sinisterly. You finally can't tolerate it anymore. There are 30,000 Bailiang's right army outside the city. Do you still dare to kill me in the heavy tomb? Then, Zhou Kong laughed and pretended to look around. In the romance novels, there's an interesting joke about throwing a cup as a signal. It's said that as long as a wine cup is thrown, several hundred executioners will rush out and chop the person into mincemeat. It's just that you, Great Ancestor Gu, don't have a wine cup in your hands. These generals and lieutenants in the room don't seem to listen to your orders, do they? Great Ancestor Gu smiled. You and I both know that in the military town of Heavy Tomb, you, Commander Zhou, put me under house arrest. Now, all the generals here more or less don't like me. The veteran General Qin Yunchue, who was afraid of adding fuel to the fire, sighed. How did things come to this point? It would be good if Chu Lushan was here. Otherwise, Yan Wenguan or Yuan Zuozong would be fine too. This was the result of a group of dragons without a leader. If they were not facing a major event that could affect the trend of Bailiang and even the entire world, Great Ancestor Gu, Zhou Kong, and even the young Bailiang military talents like Ning Amei of Qidong could take charge alone and decide the outcome of a state war. They would not have such a headache. Thinking of this, Chen Yinchue suddenly felt sad. He remembered the military years when he was young. At that time, there were so many fierce generals and strategists gathered together. Li Shan, Zhao Chongling, Yan Wenwan, Wu Yong, Su Pu, Wei Taizhan, Lu Yuanji, Zhong Hongwu, Chen Zhibao, Yuan Zuozong, Chu Lushan. But at that time, there would be someone who would make the final decision. There would never be such an unfamiliar situation that was close to internal strife. Unfortunately, the prince had to go to Liuzhou in person to put out the fire. And Chu Lushan, the number one person of the border army who guarded Huaiyang Pass, for some reason, did not make any decisions about the complicated military affairs of Heavy Tomb behind him. Chen Yinchue knew that if he did not act as a peacemaker, there might be a big fight in the conference hall today. While Chen Yinchue was more inclined towards Zhou Kong taking the initiative to attack, Great Ancestor Gu was the leading figure of the infantry in Liangzhou. Chen Yinchue could not help but feel some sympathy towards Jean Partridge's unbridled humiliation and suppression. In the end, this was not a conflict between Zhou and Gu, but a natural conflict between Beiliang cavalry and infantry. Even Yan Wenluan could not change this conflict. Beiliang had more infantry, but in the war with Bei Mang, the main characters were always the cavalry. In the end, it was also the cavalry that decided victory. Just like when Beiliang was changing between the old and the new, the Longxiang army and the Great Snow Dragon cavalry had each attacked Bei Mang and shone brilliantly. Later on, in Yuzhou, which was known as the main camp of Beiliang infantry, it was the 10,000-strong cavalry led by the young General Yu Wandao that shook the world. Chen Yinchue took a few steps closer to the table and pressed his hands lightly on the table. He said softly, "The situation in Liangzhou is not good. Liuzhou is the same. Even Wang Yi has to go there personally to face Lu Gui's army. Maybe he will also face that Tuoba Bodhisattva. Let's not make trouble for Wang Yi. If you have something to say, say it. If you are angry, don't say it." Chapter 1581. Chen Yinchue paused for a moment and glanced at Zhou Kong and Great Ancestor Gu, who were standing opposite each other. "Everyone, allow me to remind you that this is the Border Military Conference Hall, which is second only to the Northern Liang Protectorate. This is not the Liang Temple where civil officials talk and military officials run errands. We are also not those civil officials who stay out of the affairs and glorify themselves as strategists. You and I are both leading troops to war. Perhaps someone will personally go to the battlefield tomorrow. Perhaps today will be the last time I, Chen Yinchue, will see you. I believe in General Gu's cautiousness, and I also believe in General Zhou's decisiveness. Whether the Heavy Tomb cavalry will fight or defend, from the looks of it, there are pros and cons. General Gu and General Zhou have already discussed a lot. Right now, we can't get in touch with Huaiyang Pass, Commander Yuan is not in Liangzhou, and Prince has also gone to Liuzhou where the situation is urgent. Can we attack and defend at the same time? For example, if General Gu thinks that General Zhou's 30,000 left cavalry, General Qi's 6,000 iron stupas and General Yuan's white feather guards are too radical, then. Great Ancestor Gu hesitated for a second and said firmly, "Commander Qin, to be honest, we not only have to defend the Heavy Tomb cavalry, but also have to leave enough cavalry for Beiliang. This is not a question of radical or conservative, but we can't fight this battle in the first place. At the very least, even if the Heavy Tomb cavalry can kill more than 100,000 enemies, even if we lose more than 30,000 of our own, the left cavalry can't form an absolute fighting force within a year. In that case, Beiliang has already lost. What's more, facing Dongzhuo's well-prepared cavalry and Dongzhuo's well-prepared left cavalry and General Qi's and General Yuan's two elite cavalry armies, can we really guarantee a complete victory without any losses?" Great Ancestor Gu picked up the special bamboo pole and drew a big circle south of the Heavy Tomb cavalry and north of the border of Liangzhou. Why is he Zhonghu's 40,000 right cavalry still not moving? He didn't hear the bad news about Huda City, so he went north to the Heavy Tomb cavalry. The reason is very simple. Whether or not the new city, which cost half of Northern Liang's resources, can be successfully built will determine whether or not Northern Liang can once again fight outside the pass. Under this premise, Huaiyang Pass can be lost, and even the grave that we are in can be lost. However, before we break through the city, we must do our best to stop Northern Mang's army to the north of the new city. The longer, the better. It doesn't matter how many enemies our Beiliang frontier army kills during this period of time. It doesn't matter if Commander Chu, Great Ancestor Gu, Chen Yun, or Zhou Kong. Great Ancestor Gu smiled bitterly and said, Dongzhuo can't wait for us to take the initiative to fight him and exchange forces with him. As the king of the South Courtyard, he is very happy. To put it bluntly, the Beimang barbarians in Xijing and Norland only care about how many Beiliang frontier army Dongzhuo has killed, but they don't care too much about how many Beimang soldiers have died. Look at the Hulu Pass on the eastern front. That young general called Zhong Tan has killed many Beimang siege troops. No matter how many people have died, as long as he breached Wugong City and Luanhe City, he will be promoted by Old Lady Murong and become the new Beimang, Xia Zhumo. I don't mind asserting that as long as the left cavalry is mobilized, even if more than 10,000 people are killed in battle, the throne of the king of the South Courtyard under Dongzhuo's but will be stabilized for another half a year. Great Ancestor Gu lowered his head and looked at the sand table as he said in a hoarse voice, I know, except for me, everyone else in the room thinks that Heavy Tomb has let down the Beiliang frontier army, Huda City and Lu Jinu since they chose to avoid the battle despite having so many soldiers. At this moment, a slightly indifferent voice sounded from the gate of the conference hall, enough. Not only Great Ancestor Gu raised his head abruptly, but all the generals including Zhou Kong and Qin Yunchue also turned their heads to look at that slender figure. The young man looked travel-worn, but he made people feel very reassured. This person was Su Fengnian, who came to Heavy Tomb military town from Courtyard Pasture alone. In order to arrive at Huaiyang Pass as soon as possible and bring more soldiers to Liuzhou province for Shifu, the general of Liangzhou province who had regained his power, Su Fengnian didn't even take a white horse attendant with him. Su Fengnian, one of the 4 grandmasters, had an ugly look on his face. However, what really made Su Fengnian angry was the storm in the conference hall. Qi Jiajia's sword Qi, which had been suppressed, had been stirred up again. Huda City in Liangzhou province had fallen, Lu Jinu had died in battle, and Liuzhou province was very likely to be completely annihilated by the Longxiang army. It was hard to say whether Yang Yuanzhan's army in Yuzhou province could be completely surrounded by Yang Yuanzhan's army. The new city on the border of Liangzhou province had not been built yet, and there were no huge cities to rely on and no reliable passes in Liangzhou province. However, Su Fengnian, who was one of the mainstays of Liangzhou province's cavalry, was suddenly critically ill, and Su Fengnian couldn't join the battle for the time being. It could be imagined how bad Su Fengnian's mood was at this moment. However, the young lord who strode into the conference hall still tried his best to restrain himself. Even so, Su Fengnian didn't show any intention of denouncing anyone. Even Zhou Kong, the fearless deputy general of cavalry, lost his arrogance and felt a little guilty for the first time. Su Fengnian gently exhaled. After a moment of silence, he slowly opened his mouth. I also want to go to Qingsang City in Liuzhou province and beat Tuoba Bodhisattva to death. It would be best if I could kill Lu Gui as well. However, I can't do that now. Moreover, Liangzhou province is more important than Liuzhou province. Therefore, I could only come here without stopping. Then I stood outside the door and listened to your quarrel for about 15 minutes. It's a pity that I didn't get to see Commander Gu and Commander Zhou fight. It's a pity. Embarrassed, Zhou Kong coughed a few times. When some of the young captains saw this scene, they tried their best to hold back their laughter, but it was difficult for them to do so. Su Fengnian did not continue to dig at the old generals. He walked to the north of the table and faced the south. The generals of the left and right factions naturally held their breaths and stood solemnly. Su Fengnian said, subduing the enemy without fighting is the specialty of the civil officials. We Beiliang don't like this. If the Beimang barbarians want to go south, then we will fight and win. We will beat them until they can't even return to Beimang. Fighting and winning has always been the self-confidence of our Bailiang, or perhaps the Su family's iron cavalry. It's not arrogance. However, even Su Shao has never felt that a smooth victory is worth being happy about. Which battle was the battle that established our Bailiang frontier army as the #1 army in the Spring and Autumn War? It was Su Shao who told me personally that it was the Battle of the Western Rampart that was the most bitter, the most tragic, and the most casualties. There were many times when he couldn't even see hope and almost wanted to give up. Now, our Bailiang will face the second battle of the Western Rampart. Su Shao is no longer here. Li Shan, Zhao Chongling, Chen Jibao, Wu Qi, Su Pu, Zhong Hongwu, and others have either left or died. But now, by my side, there are you, Chen Yinxue, Zhou Kong, Yuan Nanting, Qi Danghua, Ningame, and great ancestor Gu who just entered Bailiang. To the north, there are Chu Lushan at Huayang Pass. To the east, there are Yan Lunluan's infantry and Yul Wandao's cavalry in Yuzhou. There are also Hu Kuei and Huang Fujin. In the mouth of the gourd, there are 2 heavy cavalry troops led by Yuan Zuozong. To the west, there are Su Longxiang, Li Mofan, and Wang Lingbao's Longxiang army, and Yang Guangdou and Chen Shiliang's Liuzhou provincial governor's office. To the south, there are even more. Not to mention Bailiang's local civil and military officials, there are even thousands of foreign scholars. The retired Wei Taizhan, Lu Yuanji, and the others, including the old soldier Lin Dofang, have all made it clear that they want to come back and return to the Bailiang frontier army. Su Fengnian suddenly smiled and said, whether there will be such a story about Bailiang fighting against a country in the history books in the future is the civil and military officials of Liang. It's none of our business. They can write whatever they want. But at least I think that after a few years, everyone here should strive to survive and tell their descendants and juniors about their military life. It's always good. Probably just like what Su Shao nagged me about all those years ago. If by any chance someone here were to die in battle, he wouldn't have the fortune to show off to the young people. At this point, Su Fengnian looked at Zhou Kong. For example, if you, Zhou Kong, were to die in battle, I believe that in the future, there would be an old man surnamed Gu. If he met a young man surnamed Zhou, he might sit down and casually chat for a bit. While drinking wine, he would say that old man Zhou Kong from your family back then. His words were always unpleasant, but he was a hero who was willing to die for Bailiang. Su Fengnian's expression became absent-minded for a moment. Then he smiled and said, if I were to die in battle and any of you survived, then please tell your descendants that Bailiang lost in a battle to the death, not without a fight. Chapter 1582. Unlike Liuya and Fuling, Zhongzhou military town, which was located behind Huayang Pass, was mostly guarded by infantry. However, compared to Huayang Pass, which had a natural barrier to rely on, Zhongzhou military town seemed to be less confident. In fact, on this line of defense, the general of Zhongzhou military town could not stand up straight when facing 3 colleagues of the same rank, and his voice was never loud. The 2 towns of Luya and Fuling had always been garrisoned with a considerable number of cavalry troops at the border. The 2 generals of the 2 towns were related to the 2 current deputy generals of the cavalry. Zhongzhou was an awkward character that was neither loved nor loved by his grandmother. Although it belonged to the northern Liang cavalry, it had more infantrymen. However, it had nothing to do with great ancestor Gu and could not rely on anyone. When Huayang Pass became the location of the Protectorate Manor, Zhong, who was raised by his stepmother, became more and more inconspicuous. Su Fengnian lived in a courtyard that had just been cleaned up. The courtyard was not big, but it was elegant and quiet. It was not easy to find a courtyard like this in a military town that was filled with influential officials at the border of Liangzhou. After Su Fengnian lived in the courtyard, he sent a signal to Zhongzhou that was worth chewing. The young lord did not summon Zhou Kong, the partridge who had accompanied His Royal Highness to the capital with hundreds of old soldiers, nor did he summon great ancestor Gu, who he had found in the Jianghu of the Central Plains, nor did he summon great ancestor Qi Dangua, who was the adopted son of a general like Chu Lushan and Yuan Suozong. Instead, he called Ningame, who was from the Phoenix Battalion, to drink with him in the courtyard. The new deputy general of Iron Pagoda, Ningame, was still the interesting man with a rough appearance and a delicate voice. However, he was more restrained than before. After all, the young man sitting across from him was no longer His Royal Highness, who was looked down upon by the whole Bailiang. Su Fengnian clinked his cup with Ningame's and lamented, "Back then, General Ning took 100 men to accompany me to cause trouble in Jianghu. Many of them, including Hong Shuwen, are no longer in the Phoenix barracks. They have all become local military officers or even field officers. Yuan Meng, however, is still here. A few days ago at the courtyard ranch, he complained to me that he mentioned to you that he wanted to enter the Iron Stupa. However, not only did you not agree because of old friendship, you also scolded him." Ningame subconsciously sat up straight and said with the graceful voice of a woman from Dongyue, "The Phoenix Battalion has had many new faces in the past 2 years. I feel that with an old man like Captain Yuan in the battalion, I can be at ease." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Some of the young men who left the Phoenix Battalion under the identity of the White Horse Righteous faction would occasionally meet in private. I heard that they like to ask each other how high an official they have become, as well as how high an official they hope to become. They talk about who will become a border general or a border official in the future, and whether or not they can support each other. In this aspect, it is a bit like the Liang Imperial Court's fellow countrymen in the Imperial examinations. Back in the day, our Bailiang's earliest border crossbowmen also went through such a phase. When they first met again, they were all talking about who had died on the battlefield. Moreover, they were all speaking in a very envious tone. After a few years or 10 years, it was different. They were all asking how big the newly bought residence was, how beautiful the newly taken concubine was, and how many acres of high-quality farmland they had obtained. Seeing Ningame's expression change drastically, Su Fengnian waved his hand and smiled. "Don't be nervous. This is all human nature. Situations like the Phoenix battalions are rare for the time being. When the water is too clear, there will be no fish. I understand this principle." Besides, Su Shao also said something similar. In his eyes, the world we live in now is too different from decades ago. At that time, almost everyone was thinking about how to survive. Everyone's head was tied to their waistbands. The only difference was that the commoners' heads were tied to straw ropes, while the scholars' heads were tied to the more valuable jade waistbands. In reality, everyone was in precarious situations. But now, everyone is thinking about how to live better. Therefore, since last year, families have all moved outside the borders of Bailiang. Since staying in Bailiang could lead to death, then they fled to a place where there was no smoke, a place where they couldn't hear the hooves of Beimang's horses. If Huainan doesn't work, then they can go to Gangnam-do. If Gangnam-do is also at war one day, then they can go south of the Guangling River. If that doesn't work, then they can go to Nanjiang. As long as they have money, they can escape all the way south. In the end, they can survive. Su Fengnian's fingers twirled the white porcelain wine cup that didn't lose out to the exquisite ones used by the aristocratic families of Jiangnan. He raised it slightly. "I am one of the few extravagant people in the world. I know the market price of this small wine cup. In the rich places of the Central Plains, it probably sells for 2 or 3 taels of silver. After painstakingly moving to our Bailiang, the price will more than double. Of course, if we really want to talk about it, the valuable items in Mount Qingliang are innumerable. The scholars of the Central Plains say that Bailiang made millions poor, but one family rich. In fact, they aren't wrong. Just in Wutongan alone, there are more than 300 precious calligraphy and paintings with the word 'fake' on my handprint. However, compared to people like Zhong Hongwu, I, Su Fengnian, have long been known for being a prodigal son. I'm not quite the same as those misers. Chapter 1583. Su Fengnian smiled and said, when I was young, Su Xiao would always bring priceless antiques to Wutongin. He didn't understand what was so good about them, and he didn't understand how they could be sold for such a high price just by writing a few words or smearing some ink on them. He could only tell me that they were worth a lot of money, and then he would add how many Bailiang horses and how many Bailiang swords could be bought with them. In these years, I had Administrator Li Gongda, Lingzhou Provincial Governor Su Beiji, and Song Dongming help me secretly sell antiques, and paintings. I watched box after box of things being moved out of Mount Qingliang. General Ning, do you know what I was thinking? Ning Amei shook his head with all his might. Su Fengnian joked, I just wanted to complain to Su Xiao that you made a loss back then. Ning Amei laughed involuntarily. Su Fengnian restrained his smile. Let's not talk about the distant past. Bai Yu had only been at Mount Qingliang for a few days, but he was already dissatisfied with Song Dongming. How could I let Zhou Kong and great ancestor Gu get along? One was one of the few Bailiang old soldiers who was willing to look up to me. The other was an outsider I invited with great difficulty. One was in the cavalry, the other was in the infantry. Today, it was wrong for me to speak up for either in the discussion hall. Family matters, national matters, and the world matters. Let's talk about family matters. Wang Linquan, who had vaguely become Bailiang's god of fortune, and Lu Dongjiang, who was depressed and unable to achieve his goals, were two fathers-in-law and two in-laws. Logically speaking, it should help the Lu family, who was not acclimatized. But can the Lu family really be supported? Among these, I just didn't want to delve too deeply into Wang Linquan's schemes against the Lu family's descendants. One was too shrewd, the other too stupid. They hit it off immediately. Ning Amei sighed, speechless. He didn't dare to say anything, nor did he know what he could say. Su Fengnian looked at Ning Amei and joked, do you think it's not easy for me to become the head of the household? Ning Amei, whose thoughts had been seen through, nodded. Perhaps he was worried that he would be seen as a bootlicker, so he said in a deep voice, this general really thinks so. Su Fengnian said, I'm just complaining, that's all. I can drink a little wine with you, it's actually very easy. The truly difficult ones are Lu Jinu and the others who carved their names on the stone steels on Mount Qingliang. Su Fengnian put down his wine cup. But the ones who have it even harder are you, Ning Amei, Zhou Kong, and Grand Ancestor Gu. It's all of you. Su Fengnian exhaled heavily and stood up. Maybe there are places like Bailiang in the whole of Liang. In this great world where everyone can live, some people are willing to die. But I'm sure there's no other place where so many people are willing to die together. Su Fengnian turned to look at Ning Amei. I don't feel the slightest bit of heartache for the things in those chests to be sold to other high-ranking officials and dignitaries. Even if Mount Qingliang is emptied, and my Su family is left with nothing, it doesn't matter. Su Fengnian's mouth twitched. It was unclear whether it was because of the sword qi in his body or because of some other reason, but he seemed to be gnashing his teeth. He said fiercely, but the real assets that Su Xiao left to me, such as the 300,000 steel cavalry, after I succeeded to the position of king of Bailiang, I would feel heartache if even one of them died. Another example is the morale of my Su family's army. I would feel guilty if even a fraction of it was lost in my hands. Ning Amei suddenly thought of a saying. Those who think too much will tire their hearts, those who think too much will suffer. Su Fengnian suddenly laughed and said softly, do you know what the old generals, Wei Taizhan, Lu Yuanji, and Lu Yuanji, were thinking when I passed by the right cavalry commander He Zhonghu's mansion and saw them visiting the sick? Among them, Lu Yuanji told me a few words from the bottom of his heart. The old man said that in a short 20 years, the young Lieutenant Zhong Hongwu, who would always lead the troops in a battle to the death, would become the Huaihua great general who held great power but only knew how to eliminate dissidents in the army. Lu Yunji told me that we must cherish the Beiliang cavalry now. In another 20 or 30 years, we might not be able to see them again. Therefore, he and Wei Taizhan wanted to take advantage of the fact that they were still able to ride horses and raise their swords to die a quick death before they could see the Beiliang cavalry again. Ningame took a sip of wine and murmured softly, "Born in Beiliang and dying in Beiliang, how delightful." After muttering to himself, Ningame, who paid great attention to details, carefully put down the wine cup in his hand. As if he felt that he had placed it in a wrong position, he even moved it a little. Only then did he stand up and ask, "Your Highness, I've always had a question in my heart, but I didn't dare to ask. Since I've drunk wine today, perhaps the wine has given me courage to ask." Su Fengnian froze for a moment, then smiled and said, "Ask away." Ningame grinned and asked, "I just want to know, if there comes a day when all 300,000 Beiliang cavalry are gone, will you regret it, Your Highness?" Su Fengnian said without hesitation, "Nonsense. I'll definitely regret it to death, to the extent that my intestines turn green." Ningame scratched his head. There didn't seem to be any disappointment on his face. Instead, he chuckled and said, "As expected. Your Highness is good at doing business, but when it comes to buying people's hearts, you're still a lousy layman." Su Fengnian laughed loudly. Ningame said seriously, "But I know that even if you know that you'll lose all 300,000 cavalry and have to start all over again, Your Highness will still make the same choice." Su Fengnian grunted in agreement. "I can also see that. In the past few years, my ability to buy people's hearts has been a so-so, while General Ning's flattery has improved." Ningame smiled calmly and said, "If old General Liu is right, dying on the spot is perfect." Chapter 1584. After Ningame left the courtyard, Su Fengnian, who reeked of alcohol, was cleaning up the mess on the stone table. The two deputy commanders, Zhou Kong and Qin Yinchue, came together with a heavy expression. Su Fengnian already had a premonition, so he signaled the two generals to sit down. As expected, Qin Yinchue told him a piece of bad news. Tian Heng, the commander of the Yuzhou cavalry, split his troops into two groups. He had his deputy commander, Yu Wandao, lead 20,000 cavalry to take a detour and rush out of Calabash Mouth. The old general personally led 10,000 cavalry to block the iron hooves from the Beimang and Liaodong lines. After fighting and retreating 3 times, there were only 4,000 cavalry left. All of them died at the Jitu slope at the border between Yuzhou and Hezhou. Yan Wenwan had no choice but to transfer 16,000 elite infantry from Yuzhou to reinforce the Helan Mountain defense line in the northeast of Yuzhou. During this period, as the Huai provincial governor Kai Nan did not send troops and was determined to watch from the sidelines, the entire Hezhou existed in name only. Wang Sui's cavalry rushed straight to the east gate of Yuzhou. Qin Yinchue sighed, "Although I knew that the imperial court was unreliable, Kai Nan, who had more than 100,000 soldiers, used to be Gu Jintang's right-hand man. In the end, he did not even have the courage to fight a symbolic battle. I don't know if it was Kai Nan's own idea or if the new administrator, Han Lin, secretly received the order of Graydon City." Partridge Zhou Kong snorted coldly and said, "There's no difference. Kai Nan is a dog that Gu Jiantang raised outside. Gu Jiantang himself is not any better. He is also a dog that the Zhao family threw into Liao province. This time, he avoided battle and gave the large river province to Wang Sui with both hands. Kai Nan and Han Lin probably have a tacit understanding. The court hopes that people in northern Liang die. Gu Jiantang wants to preserve his strength so that he can bargain with the Zhao family in the future. Right now, the only true troops under the Gu family's command are the Duo Yen elite cavalry that Tang Taizhuang raised. If Kai Nan's vitality is greatly damaged, he can forget about returning to Graydon City in a grand manner. If Kai Nan is injured, he will not be able to return to Graydon City. Su Fengnian shook his head and said, in fact, Kai Nan and Han Lin both want to fight this battle. However, Han Lin wants to fight immediately while Kai Nan is waiting for Gu Jintang's secret letter. Chen Yinchue and Zhou Kong looked at each other. Zhou Kong was impatient and could not hide his thoughts. He lowered his voice and asked curiously, Your Highness, is this the spy report you obtained from the Shui room? Su Fengnian smiled and said, Previously, at the escaped summer town at the foot of Wudong Mountain, I had some dealings with Yin Mao Chen and Han Lin's son and made a shady business deal. This time, Han Lin took the initiative to reveal the true intentions of the central government in the capital. It can be considered a show of sincerity to Beiliang. Zhou Kong said in surprise, That's strange. Did the Zhao family's son and Gu Jintang's brains get caught in the door? Why did they suddenly change their minds and become benevolent bodhisattvas? Su Fengnian hit the nail on the head and said, Gu Jiantang wants to fight because the situation forces him to. Putting aside the grudge between him and Wang Sui, Dong Yue's son-in-law, Wang Sui's swaggering departure from the Eastern Front is an open slap to Gu Jintang's old face. No matter how good Gu Jiantang can tolerate it, he still has to consider the opinions of the people in the imperial court. The reason why he wants Kai Nan to fight a little later is that he wants to cooperate with the two Liao border armies to fight a big battle. Before that, he naturally wants Wang Sui to fight to the death with our Yuzhou garrison for a while so that he and Kai Nan can reap the benefits. To Gu Jiantang, this is a great opportunity. Once he succeeds, the situation at the border between the two Liao dynasties will instantly change from a long-lasting stalemate of equal strength to the advantage of the two Liao dynasties. As for the imperial court, Han Lin didn't say much. I can only figure out some of the meaning behind his words. It seems like someone has proposed a very aggressive strategy during the small imperial court meeting. They want to use Ji Bei and Hezhou as bait to lure the enemy deep into the enemy's territory. In order to complete the deployment, not only Kai Nan, but also Yuan Tingshan's remaining private army of Lijiayan Castle and the newly risen Deputy General of Ji Province, Han Fang, will become involuntary pawns. Zhou Kong clicked his tongue and said, This is a rare big move in Graydon City. Your Highness, those old fellows who do nothing, like Xiao Yao and Yang Xinqing, I don't think they have this kind of courage, do they? Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment, his face dark and gloomy. Minxia Province's left scattered cavalry officer Qin Wang, Sun Yin who just got fired from the Imperial College, and Lu Su, the hermit who just got a new master from King of Jing'an, Zhao Sun. This must be the plan of one of these three people. However, after this plan was proposed, without Qi Yanglong and Huan Wen's approval, without Zhao Yuling and Yin Maochuan's agreement, it is destined that it will not be able to leave the capital and pass it to Han Lin. Zhou Kong said with a strange expression, Why does it sound like our Beiliang owes them a great favor? Su Fengnian joked, You can't say that. Graydon City is a stubborn and willful brat. One day, he suddenly knows how to consider the big picture. While in the end, it is to protect his own interests, it will still surprise the officials beside him. After laughing, Chen Yinchue said worriedly, Will Wang Sui's army affect the battle at the Calabash Gate? Su Fengnian nodded and said, Of course it will, but Wang Sui still can't change the big picture. Perhaps Wang Sui never had this thought in the first place. Yang Yuanzhan, Lu Gue, and Huang Songpu, who has returned, are all obstacles to Wang Sui taking control of Beimang's military power. It is already reasonable for the old woman and the Taiping commandery to have the foresight to come to Yozhou's aid. Just wait and see. As long as the eastern front of Beimang is dragged into a quagmire by Gu Jiantang and Yang Yuanzhan's army is destroyed, Wang Sui will be able to stand out immediately. He will go from being the commander of a single front to a person of power no less than Dongzhua. When that day comes, Wang Sui will truly show his abilities. Chen Yinchue sighed emotionally. Hudi's city was lost at the wrong time, but there is nothing we can do about it. Lu Jinu has already done enough. Now that the war has reached this stage, we can only see who can endure longer. In the established strategy of the senior Beiliang advisors and military leaders such as Li Shan and Yan Wenluan, although they had long foreseen that Bei Mang would attack Beiliang from the south with all its strength, they did not know which place to break through. Apart from Lingzhou, Liuzhou and Yuzhou were obviously more logical than Liangzhou, which was at its peak. However, Dongjue had made two unexpected moves. First, he pressed the border on three fronts, minimizing the advantage of a single Beiliang cavalry in one of the battlefields. Secondly, the Beiliang frontier army had the tactical intention of moving around through their own well-developed posthouse routes. Then, he personally oversaw the army on the central front, sparing no effort to attack Huda's city without any regard for losses. Moreover, at the crucial moment when the main force of the cavalry outside Liangzhou Pass was quietly rushing to the mouth of the Calabash, he coincidentally captured Huda's city, which was originally expected to be defended to the death for another 2 to 3 months. Su Fengnian calmly said, "In this war between Beiliang and Bei Mang, there were actually two turning points. The first was when the Fuling cavalry general Wei Liang rashly attacked. Both sides set up their own ambushes. Looking back now, it was indeed Dongjue who had a bigger appetite at that time. Unfortunately, because that Fuling junior commander Wei Liang interfered at the Crouching Dragon Pass, both sides' plans fell through, inadvertently allowing Beiliang to escape disaster. The second turning point was when Dongjue tried to use Liuzhou as a breakthrough point again, allowing the tens of thousands of Dong family's personal soldiers to secretly leave the central front. In the end, he was stopped by Chu Lushan's 8,000 cavalry. I originally thought that the mouth of the Calabash would be the third turning point for Beiliang to seize the initiative." Chapter 1585. Su Fengnian laughed self-deprecatingly. "It seems meaningless to talk about this now." Chen Yinchue said seriously, "Almost 200,000 Bei Mang barbarians' heads, especially Yang Yuanzhan's head. Your Highness, how can this be meaningless?" Su Fengnian was silent for a moment, then said slowly, "Earlier in the meeting hall, I only said some empty words to boost morale. Since you, Zhou Kong, have taken the initiative to come to me, then I'll be frank." Zhou Kong said resentfully, "If you want to beat or scold me, do as you please. I'm already very satisfied that I'm able to walk into this courtyard today without being refused the door." Su Fengnian waved his hand and said, "In terms of cavalry, you, Zhou Kong, have gathered 30,000 left cavalry, Qidong's Iron Stupa, Yuan Nanting's White Feather Guard, and He Zhonghu's scattered 40,000 right cavalry. In total, there are more than 80,000. It can be said that the majority of Beiliang's cavalry is here. As for infantry, apart from the troops that have entered Huaiyang Pass and Liuya and Fuling towns, Great Ancestor Gu still has 30,000. Old General Qin also brought some Yuzhou infantry with him. It's not wrong that you, Zhou Kong, don't want to hide in the grave area, but Great Ancestor Gu is worried that the 30,000 left cavalry will be used in the exchange of troops." Great Ancestor Gu's words hit the nail on the head. Now, anyone and any soldier outside Liangzhou Pass can die. As long as the new city can be built smoothly before the autumn of the third year of Xiangfu, then it can be considered a worthy death. Then, from now on, with Huaiyang Pass and Grave as the center of attack and defense, all the troops and attacks must be carried out around this principle. Su Fengnian poured a full cup of wine, dipped his finger in the cup, and quickly pointed on the stone table. "The first complete line of defense outside Liangzhou Pass is with Huda Town as the core. The cavalry of Liuya and Fuling towns on the two flanks will act as a distraction. Huaiyang Pass, which is located in a dangerous area, and Grave Site and Qingyuan towns, which are more inclined to defense, will act as the second small line of defense under this framework. Even if Huda Town falls, we won't lose everything. Now that we don't have Huda Town, this thorn in our flesh, Bei Mang's army has spread out on all fronts. Now, excluding Grave Site, not only Huaiyang Pass, but also Liuya, Fuling Town, and Qingyuan town are facing Beimang's infantry siege. In my opinion, Fuling and Luyang Pass can be lost, but Qingyuan town cannot fall. If we lose Qingyuan town, which controls the west gate of Liangzhou Pass, not only will Hezhong's 40,000 cavalry be forced to withdraw, it will also allow Dongzhuo to attack Liuzhou however he wants. Therefore, Zhou Kong, you need to reinforce Qingyuan town and intercept Dongzhuo's cavalry. Not only do you need to stop them from moving south too smoothly, you also need to try to take down this 40,000 cavalry in one go. For this reason, I will ask Yuan Nanting to transfer half of the White Feather Guards to cooperate with you, so that we can form an advantage in the battlefield around Qingyuan town. Zhou Kong frowned and said, if that's the case, then grave sights Gu. Zhou Kong suddenly noticed Su Fengnian's strange look and quickly changed his words, won't Commander Gu be under too much pressure? With only 6,000 iron stupas and half of the White Feather Guards, Grave Sight will completely lose the initiative in the battle. Su Fengnian glanced at the partridge and said in a low voice, therefore, Great Ancestor Gu is paying the price of Grave Sight's infantry being beaten like a tortoise, so that you, Zhou Kong, can gallop on the battlefield in Qingyuan. Zhou Kong didn't say anything. Su Fengnian reminded him, Beiliang cares a lot about the gains and losses in Qingyuan, and Dongzhuo can probably see that whether Qingyuan will become a trap for Beimang to besiege the city and attack the reinforcements will be up to your left cavalry to judge on the battlefield. At that time, I hope that you can resist the military merits of thousands or even tens of thousands of people. Once you fall into the blockade of Beimang's main cavalry, you should know that no one has the ability to make soldiers out of beans, so there's no way to make 30,000 cavalry soldiers for you to send into the Qingyuan battlefield. What's more, after the left cavalry and half of the White Feather Guards are surrounded by Beimang, let alone Qingyuan, Grave Sight, Great Ancestor Gu, and Old General Qin can only retreat to Hezhonghu's army in one breath, and there's only a newly built city behind us. Zhou Kong suddenly asked in a low voice, in the Battle of Qingyuan, both sides' intentions are still not hidden. I believe that with Dongzhuo's insight, Beimang's barbarians are very likely to besiege the city and attack the reinforcements. At most, they didn't expect that not only would my 30,000 left cavalry be mobilized, but even the White Feather Guards would cooperate with them. In that case, Your Highness, why don't we just directly target Beimang's ambush? I have confidence in our crossbowmen. In our own territory, we can definitely accurately find out the Beimang's backup plan. Moreover, even if we meet on a narrow path and have to fight in pairs, Dongzhuo's crow pen won't be enough. Your Highness, don't worry. I, Zhou Kong, guarantee that I won't act according to my whims. We'll listen to Great Ancestor Gu. All the battles of the left cavalry are to preserve our strength. Su Fengnian shook his head without hesitation and said, fighting this battle in Qingyuan is only to do our best to prevent Beimang from being too passive. It's not that I don't want to take risks, it's not that I don't want to gamble with Dongzhuo on the sand table. It's just that I can't. Beimang can afford to gamble, and they can afford to lose. At the very least, they can afford to lose again. But we can't squander even a single opportunity. At this point, Su Fengnian asked with a smile, General Zhou, the toad wants its life and the snake wants its fill. Do you feel very sullen? Zhou Kong chuckled and said, I do feel a little cowardly. But I'm an old soldier who has followed the great general for many years. I know what's important and what's not. But to be honest, after arriving in Beiliang, everything has been smooth sailing for so many years. This time, if Your Highness hadn't come to the grave, Great Ancestor Gu might not have been able to stop me. Chen Yinshui, who had been quiet all this time, said thoughtfully, we do need to reflect on ourselves. Your Highness, you've seen and heard with your own eyes what happened in the meeting hall today. Other than Commander Gu, I'm afraid that even I can't stand this. Yes, for the past 20 years, our Beiliang frontier army has been competing with the Beimang barbarians. Not to mention a battle with a few hundred people, we've never lost a battle with more than 10,000 people. So this time, we've suddenly lost Huda City, which greatly reduced the battle results we were about to obtain at Huluku. We seem to be a little stunned. If we can't turn this around, we might suffer a big loss this time. Your Highness, it's not that I, Chen Yinchue, want to flatter you, but you've come at the right time. When Su Fengnian sent Zhou Kong and Chen Yinchue to the door of the small courtyard, he said to Zhou Kong without reason, if Dongjue has set up 2 or more large-scale ambushes in Qingyuan, your left cavalry should consider retreating to the west. If that doesn't work, you can take a detour and return to the grave. Zhou Kong was stunned. The west? Your Highness, if we go further west, we'll be at the border with Liuzhou. Su Fengnian didn't say anything. Zhou Kang's eyes suddenly lit up. He asked carefully, Your Highness, are you saying that we can win the battle at Liuzhou? Su Fengnian laughed softly. Ko Jianghuai and Shifu are both generals who can turn the tide. As for whether they can do it, whether they can make the Qingyuan cavalry battle the third turning point of the Liangmang War, let's wait and see. Chapter 1586. In the past, Ningame was able to jump from a lower-class 6th-rank general in the Phoenix Battalion to a lower-class 3rd-rank Iron Buddha deputy general with real power. This was clearly because he was close to Su Fengnian. This time, he was able to be the first to meet the young king. Although it was unexpected, it was within reason. After all, Ningame represented all the young generals that Su Fengnian had promoted in the Beiliang army in recent years. Su Fengnian was especially fond of Ningame. In the eyes of others, it was naturally intentional. Chen Yinchue and Zhou Kong, the 2 highest-ranking deputy generals of the border army in the military town of Sirius Tomb, followed closely behind and appeared to follow the rules. Following this, Su Fengnian met with Qi Danghua, Yuan Nanting, and the others. In the end, he summoned the generals who were stationed in the military town of Sirius Tomb all year round. Su Fengnian was always lukewarm in these closely linked meetings. The generals of Sirius Tomb were not familiar with the temperament of the young king. During this period, there were people who wanted to use bold words to express their loyalty and determination to Su Fengnian. In the end, Su Fengnian just laughed it off and casually changed the topic. This made these people, who had left the traditional officialdom of Beiliang for many years, still feel uneasy when they stood up and left their chairs. They were afraid that their flattery had hit the wrong horse. Fortunately, Su Fengnian personally sent them to the entrance of the courtyard, which made them feel much more at ease. They could not be blamed for thinking too much. Ever since Su Fengnian came to power, there had been a saying in the upper echelons of the border army that the new King Liang was ruthless and generous. And the target of his ruthlessness was precisely them, the generals of the border army. For example, the Huaihua general Zhong Hongwu, who treated Lingzhou as his own back garden, did not even have the chance to die of old age. As for the general Yan Wenluan, who was entrenched in Yuzhou, it was said that a lot of his sharpness had been suppressed. Su Fengnian took over the Tiger Pounce camp and supported Yul Wandao. It was obvious that he wanted him to replace Tian Heng as the general of the Yuzhou cavalry. And before this, he transferred away the provincial governor Tian Peifong, who was obedient to Yan Wenluan, and replaced him with Hu Kuei, who was not heavily factionalized and whose faction was unclear. In addition, Su Fengnian's trusted aide, Wang Fuxiong, was placed in Yuzhou's military. And the relationship between great ancestor Gu and Zhou Kong and Chen Yinchue, who were deeply rooted in the border army, was so strained. Was there really no incitement from the young king? Otherwise, how could an outsider who had just entered the border army for a few years speak so boldly in the meeting hall of the grave? It was said that now that Wei Taizhan, Lu Yuanji, Lin Dofang, and the other elders had returned to the border army, it would undoubtedly weaken the military power of Zhou Kong, Chen Yinchue, and the others to a certain extent. But no matter what, with and without Su Fengnian in charge of the grave, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. Regardless of whether or not this shrewd King Liang would take the opportunity to purge the left and right cavalry armies of Liangzhou, as long as he sat in that small courtyard, even if he did not give any specific orders, then the following big battle could be fought. Among the many guests in the small courtyard, only Great Ancestor Gu was missing. In the end, Su Fengnian did not wait for the deputy commander of the infantry army to take the initiative to visit. After weighing the pros and cons, he gave up the idea of summoning Great Ancestor Gu. Su Fengnian felt somewhat regretful. Regardless of victory or defeat, in the future, the relationship between Great Ancestor Gu and Zhou Kong and the other local generals was destined to be difficult to return to how it was before. This kind of parting was not the same as the struggle for benefits between the factions of officials in the imperial court. On the contrary, it was more similar to the apparent unity caused by conflicting political views. The more it was like this, the harder it was to mend it. It was just like how Huan Wen and Zhang Julu, at the last moment of Liang, had gone against each other. It was impossible to determine who was right and who was wrong. Su Fengnian slowly paced back and forth in the small courtyard that had returned to silence. Wang Sui led Beimang's elite cavalry on the eastern front to suddenly advance to the west, causing Beiliang to be in a rather awkward situation. This was probably what it meant when the heavens did not fulfill one's wishes. Yan Wenluan had no choice but to split up troops to guard the eastern gate of Yuzhou, where the troops were currently leaning to the north, in order to prevent a fire in the backyard. She was afraid that the entire Lingzhou would be engulfed in smoke. In this way, a few big fish would definitely slip through the gourd's mouth. Perhaps it would be Zhong Tan's private army, or perhaps it would be the Ruren cavalry of Hong Jingyan, or even Yang Yuanzhan himself. However, judging from the current situation, even if Dong Zhuo had realized that the situation at the gourd's mouth was not good and hurriedly sent troops to the gourd's mouth to coordinate with Yang Yuanzhan's troops, it would not change the outcome of the destruction of Liang Mang's main force on the eastern front. Yang Yuanzhan would definitely suffer the consequences of his radical actions of demolishing Huagong and Luanhe cities and burning all the forts and fences. Without these defensive forts that could be used as temporary strongholds of Beimang, the pincer attack from Beiliang cavalry and Yuzhou infantry was enough to be fatal. The situation at the gourd's mouth was already set. The key was how many Beimang fish Yuanzuozong and Yulwandao could catch in the end. One could foresee that Gu Jiantang would take the initiative to attack, and the Kainan and Heji border armies would also block Wang Sui's path back to the east. Everyone could see that this was an opportunity that Beiliang had created for the entire northern front of Liang. However, while Great Peace City was singing the praises of the emperor and Gu Jiantang, they would pretend to be blind and only focus on the fall of Huda City in Liangzhou. Previously, the new Huai administrator Han Lin had vaguely reminded Su Fengnian that the imperial court was pushing to set up judici in the territory of the dynasty. Although they only added one deputy judici to the territories of the various vassal kings to restrict the vassal kings who had always been judici, the person who had the chance to become the new deputy judici was very likely to be Yang Xinqing, who was covered in dirt at Guangling Road. Su Fengnian muttered Yang Xinqing's name a few times. Yang Xinqing was one of the 8 great generals of Liang and was once the local emperor of Jizhou. In the second year of Xiangfu, he lived with his tail between his legs. This time, he risked his life to become the deputy judici of Beiliang. He wanted to atone for his crimes with the young emperor and the Liang imperial court. He also wanted to help his eldest son, Yang Huqin, as the new deputy Jizhou general. Northern Liang, Liyang, as well as Yang Xinqing herself, the 3 parties were well aware that if they went to northern Liangdao to be a judici, regardless of whether they had the title of deputy or not, their real power would not be comparable to a duwei with the size of a sesame seed mung bean. Maybe Yang Xinqing's request to be demoted to the northwest was because he was prepared to die. Chapter 1587. Because of Yang Xinqing, Su Fengnian thought of the entangled Jizhou, and then he thought of the complicated situation in the Tu Liao and Beiliang. He could not help but sigh at the invisible shadows of swords and blades outside the imperial court. These were the real killers. The small Jizhou involved Kai Nan, the nominal head of the military of the Lianghuai Dao. Although he had lost power, he still controlled nearly 10,000 elite cavalry of the Li family of Yanbao. Han Fang, who was personally roped in by the Emperor of Liang, and Yang Huchen, who represented the return of his family's power to the old land. There was also the new king of Han, who did not bat an eyelid, and the interests of the group of civil officials behind Han Lin. As for the Tu Liao, whose territory was even larger, other than Gu Jiantang, who led the government on the surface, there was also Su Gong, who replaced the emperor as the assistant minister of the Ministry of War to patrol the borders. There was also Zhao Sui, who had been rooted for a long time, and the traditional power of the northern scholars led by the Ping family. There were 4 heroes. If one were to take them out and look at them individually, it would seem that each of them was well respected, but in reality, no one had a choice. Su Fengnian unconsciously stood at the foot of the wall of the small courtyard. He stretched out his palm and placed it on the wall, looking up at the top of the wall. The great building was about to collapse. Previously, through the intelligence reports from Fu Shuifang and secret court reports from Liang, which were only sent to the provincial governors of each province, the situation of the Guangling Taoism War had already tipped in West Chu's favor. After Chao Chongqing led the navy to defeat Zhao Yi's navy, on the second battlefield west of West Chu's capital, the 3 young men of West Chu once again shone brilliantly. Pei Sui, who had previously presided over the clamorous government affairs, assisted Xia Shibian, who had returned from the Western Front to preside over the defensive line. Together, they successfully blocked the river-crossing army led by Wu Zhongshuan, the #1 general of the southern frontier path. In addition, Su Yunxia, who had led 20,000 light cavalry to fight to the death against Yan Jinchuan's army, crossed the river and attacked the rear of the southern frontier army, cutting off 2 main supply routes. Not only did this slow down the pressure on West Chu's western front, it was also equivalent to breaking the plan of Li Yang's 4 fronts to encircle the capital. For West Chu, they had opened up a large and valuable strategic depth in the vast area south of the Guangling River. In order to coordinate with the southern frontier army on the western front, Zhao Yi's army, which had chosen to quickly advance westward, suddenly fell into a situation where they were alone and deep in the enemy's territory. The 30,000 elite soldiers under Zhao Yi's command, who were skilled in mountainous warfare, were defeated by Chao Chongqing's 10,000 infantry and 2 groups of 3,000 light cavalry each. In just half a day, Zhao Yi's army had been completely annihilated. Were it not for the fact that the commander-in-chief of the southern expedition, Lu Xingxiang, had taken an unexpected move and led 5,000 cavalry into the southeastern battlefield, and then his 8,000 infantry had successively defeated the 2 cities of Yima and Yangying, with the vanguard cavalry only 50 li away from the main force of West Chu, forcing West Chu to have no choice but to give up on advancing east in one spurt of energy. Perhaps Zhao Yi would have become the second Liang great feudal lord to die on the battlefield after the Duke of Huainan. It seemed that West Chu had won successive victories on the various battlefields like a hot knife through butter, ushering in the most prosperous state since the restoration of the country. However, Su Fengnian knew very well that this was just a scene of adding oil to the fire and flowers blooming. Capturing Lu Xingxiang at Yima and Yangying was just a small test. When this general, who had resigned from his position as assistant minister of the Ministry of War, completely grasped the military power of the southern expedition, unless it was Chao Chongqing personally overseeing Guangling and Jiangbei, no one would be able to stop Lu Xingxiang's march to the south. His previous inaction was not as simple as Lu Xingxiang being hindered from all sides on the surface. It was because he needed to cooperate with the imperial court to weaken the military power of Zhao Yi, Zhao Ying, and the other feudal lords. In return, the Liang imperial court had tacitly approved of Lu Xingxiang's actions of waiting for the right price. As for Wu Zhongshuan falling into the mud of the Jiangbei battlefield, wasn't this a situation that Zhao Bing, who was watching the fire from the other side of the river, was happy to see? The true enemy that West Chu's Su Yunxia was going to face next would be the southern border elites under the King of Yan's valiant general, Wang Tongshan. Otherwise, the king of Yan's Royal Highness, who had killed the barbarian tribes of Nanjiang Path when he was young, would not have been unable to even put up a fight against Su Yunxia's sneak attack, no matter how muddle-headed and incompetent he was, and how unaccustomed he was to the environment in Guangling Path. Su Fengnian suddenly laughed with schadenfreude. Little beggar, you are not feeling well right now. That General Wu must have completely turned to the imperial court. There is no other way. Your Nanjiang Path has already done nothing to reward him, but the imperial court is different. They can afford to give him the title of Jinan Great General, Minister of War, Shang Zhugua, and even de Zhugua. Perhaps after he dies, he can even receive a posthumous title as a general. Therefore, it is not your fault that you want to completely fall out with Wu Zhongshuan and watch as West Chu ruthlessly stabbed old Wu in the butt. Su Fengnian withdrew his palm. He bent his fingers and casually knocked on the wall. The sound was muffled. Today, Beiliang was fighting to the death against Beimang's million-strong army. Zhao Yi, who was known as the richest man in the world, had already wiped out his family's wealth in the face of West Chu. The old king of Jing'an, Zhao Heng, sacrificed his own life in exchange for a hereditary title for his son. The Duke of Huainan, Zhao Ying, became the first vassal king to die on the battlefield since the spring and autumn period. After Zhao Sui of Liaodong surrendered, he was cautious for half his life. Originally, Zhao Bing, the king of Yan's army, was second only to Beiliang. In the blink of an eye, Wu Zhongshuan led all the northern troops of Nanjiang Path to seek refuge with the Liang imperial court. It could be said that his vitality was greatly damaged. All of this was naturally the scheme of the late Emperor Zhao Dun, Yuan Benshi, and the former Grand Secretary Zhang Julu. It had nothing to do with the current emperor. Su Fengnian sneered at the wall and said, "Zhao Zhuan, you are thousands of miles away from your father. When you finish using up the eternal Hui inheritance left by the older generation, do you think you can still easily control the world's general trend? Gu Jiantang, Chen Zhibao, Lu Xingxiang, Zhao Yuling, Yin Mao Chen. Which one of them can you recklessly control?" Then Su Fengnian was silent for a long time. He asked himself, "Then what about me?" There was no answer. At this moment, great ancestor Gu strode into the small courtyard. Even this famous general of the spring and autumn period could not suppress the excitement in his voice. His voice trembled as he said, "Your Highness. There are 2 pieces of news." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "2 pieces of news. Then let's hear the bad news first. The good news later can be used to suppress the shock." Great ancestor Gu laughed loudly and said, "I've disappointed your Highness. Both pieces of news are great." In Liuzhou, Su Longxiang, Ko Jianghuai and Shi Fu led 5,000 cavalry to Qingyuan. In Yuzhou, apart from the vanguard General Zhong Tan and Hong Jingyan, a portion of the Ruren cavalry escaped from the gourd. Including the General Yang Yuanzan, there were 46 Beimang generals. All of them died in battle. A total of 16 huge temples were built in the gourd. In the second year of Xiangfu, Beiliang was at an absolute disadvantage in terms of military strength. Especially when Liangzhou's Huda city was in danger of falling, their 3 prefectures' border army lost more than 100,000 men in battle. They defeated Beimang with 350,000 men. Beiliang cavalry was the best in the world. Chapter 1588. The first 10 days of autumn were yellow. After the second year of Xiangfu entered autumn, a shocking piece of news quickly spread throughout the Yangtze River. It was rumored that West Chu's Jiangxi was about to ascend the throne. This meant that this princess, who had been exiled for many years, would become the second female emperor after Beimang's Murong Empress. She would also be the first female emperor in the history of the Central Plains. In response to this, almost all of the West Chu civil and military officials, other than Su Yunxia, who guarded the Jiangbei stronghold, and Pei Sui, who was in charge of confronting Wu Zhongshuan's army in the south, including Chao Chongqing and Xie Shibian, all of the West Chu civil and military officials gathered in the capital. In comparison, the Liang Imperial Court's edict to confer Wu Zhongshuan the title of Southern Conquering General and at the same time promoting General Hing Jiang Songli to General Zhenan, one of the deputy judici of Guangling Path, and returning to Guangling Path to assist the Guangling King Zhao Yi in leading the army, seemed much more lackluster. As for the two young officials who secretly followed Song Li and temporarily held the position of Guanzhang of the Ministry of Works, in this changing situation, they became more and more inconspicuous. In just 2 short years, Yuan Gua, who had been the Minister of Rights and Revenue, was the favorite student of the old Zhang Lu, who was jokingly called the fire-relieving minister. He was not like his colleague Han Lin, who the young emperor had placed high hopes on, and was not like Wang Xiongui, who had been demoted to the war-torn Guangling Path as expected by the great in officialdom. He was not like Wang Xiongui, who had been demoted to the war-torn Guangling Path as a deputy judici. Instead, he used the nondescript transitional identity of an imperial decree minister. After meeting Lu Xingxiang, he split up with Song Li and the others. Yuan Guo went to see Wu Zhongshuan, while Song Li led the 2 minor 7th-level officials from the Ministry of Works to the manor of the vassal state Zhao Yi was in. As Yuan Guo, the son of Heaven's envoy, came closer, the atmosphere on the western front of Guangling, which was at a disadvantage in the battle situation, seemed to be unusual. Logically speaking, as the target of the conferment, Wu Zhongshuan should have been the most active. Not to mention bringing a few Nanjiang generals out of the city to welcome him. At the very least, he should have prepared a welcoming feast for Yuan Guo. Not to mention whether or not Yuan Guo had a chance to make a comeback and return to the center of power, even with the reputation Yuan Guo had accumulated in the great and officialdom over the years, Wu Zhongshuan, who was about to formally step into the Liang officialdom, could not be neglected. In the end, it was King of Jingnan, Zhao Sun, who led the Qingzhou Navy General Wei Dong to welcome Yuan Guo. Wu Zhongshuan only attended a banquet held on a ship. Tang He and Li Chunyu, the 2 direct generals, did not appear. There was only an unfamiliar young man with the surname Jiang beside them. Before the banquet began, Yuan Guo expressionlessly announced the edict. The old general Wu Zhongshuan, who was wearing armor that did not suit the occasion, also expressionlessly received the edict. Among the large group of civil and military officials who had taken off their official robes, the clanging of armor on Wu Zhongshuan's body as he knelt and stood was particularly ear-piercing. This caused the table of delicacies and fine wine in the banquet that followed to taste like wax. It was extremely bland, and there was no joy to speak of. In the night, on the surface of the river some distance away from the Yellow Dragon ship, a Qingzhou warship that was responsible for patrolling the river tonight was motionless. Looking from here, one could only see the lanterns and colored banners on the ship and blurry figures. A young man in casual clothing was lying quietly on the railing with a cold smile on his lips. To the left of the young man stood Wang Xianji's 2nd disciple, Gong Bonk, 3rd disciple, Linya, and a tall woman with a hat on her head. The 4 people to the right were all in the prime of their lives. Without exception, they were all filled with a murderous aura. They were the Nanjiang infantry generals Zhang Dingyuan and Gu Ying, the Yuanzhou general Yi Xiufeng, and the Hezhou general Yang Yu. All of the generals that the king of Yan Qi Xiaobing could rely on were present. Among them, Wang Tongshan had once been the strongest general under the king of Yan Qi's command. But many years ago, he had entered the northern border of Nanjiang. This time, Wu Zhongshuan had been recruited by the court. Wang Tongshan, who was supposed to keep Wu Zhongshuan in check, showed signs of wanting to make a move. Zhao Zhu did not raise his head. He said with a slight smile, "Sister Lin, that person is Jiang Fuding of your martial emperor city." The fist Grandmaster Linya had a complicated expression as he nodded. Zhao Zhu rubbed his chin. "I'm puzzled. How did this person help Wu Zhongshuan get in touch with Great Peace City? This matchmaker is not something that any normal person can be." Linya wanted to speak but stopped. Zhao Zhu turned to look at the female martial grandmaster who had made a comment. He said with a smile, Sister Lin, do not worry. Even if Wu Zhongshuan does not have Jiang Fuding as a matchmaker, he will still make eye contact with Great Peace City. It is just a matter of time. Even if I don't look at the monk, I will still look at the Buddha. I will not compete with the Jiang person. To be honest, this time, our old General Wu really can't bring himself to be happy. Didn't we agree on being conferred the title of Marquis and General? He did become the Southern Expedition Grand General, but he wasn't conferred the title of Marquis. Don't even mention being conferred the title of the first king of a dynasty with a different surname during the auspicious Talisman era. How is this different from being the #1 great general in our southern border? 100,000 elite soldiers of Nanjiang, just to get a general of one of the 4 conquerors, it is a great loss. His Majesty the Emperor is not very generous in his actions this time. The tall female of mysterious identity said coldly, it is not that the court is unwilling to make Wu Zhongshuan a marquis. The reason that they did not keep their promise is that the Guangling Road War is not going well. If they start to make generals now, when the dust settles, what will they be rewarded? I believe that Yuan Darren from Jing will meet with Wu Zhongshuan in private and make things clear. Zhao Zhu made a sound of acknowledgement. Those who are not in charge do not know the cost of daily necessities. Maybe if it was me sitting on the dragon throne, I would do the same. I would first trick Wu Zhongshuan onto the pirate ship before anything else. Zhang Dingyuan reminded softly, His Royal Highness, Tang He and Li Chunyu are coming over on a small boat. Zhao Zhu joked, fortunately, Wang Tongshan isn't here for the time being. Otherwise, we would have been destroyed. Gu Ying, who was as beautiful as a woman, said in a gloomy voice, let's not talk about that crazy Wang Tongshan. How dare Tang He and Li Chunyu come to see His Highness? Do they really think we don't dare to kill these 2 ingrates? Zhao Zhu shook his head and said, I really don't dare. I'm already an official of the imperial court. Besides, if we really kill someone, we'll only be letting that person from Western Shu reap the benefits. I'm not willing to do a business that hurts those close to me and benefits the enemy. A small boat didn't get too close to the battleship filled with experts. After stopping, Tang He and Li Chunyu bowed deeply, and the boat turned around and left. The fierce general of Nanjiang, Liang Yu, snorted coldly, his 5 fingers gripping the railing of the boat. Zhao Zhu said indifferently, a woman leaves her home when she is of age. Let them be. The atmosphere was heavy. Only the sound of the river could be heard. Water flows downwards, people walk upwards. Zhao Zhu suddenly turned his head and asked, Miss Zhang, that Yuan Gua is your father's student. If you want to meet him, I can help arrange it. The tall female said indifferently, no need. Zhao Zhu unconsciously reached out to touch the old money pouch at his waist. He smiled and sighed, even if you have a knife, you can't kill a heartless dog. Chapter 1589. Zhao Zhu, who did not say a word, looked towards the northwest in a daze, revealing a worried expression. Although Nanjiang had its own outstanding spy system, it had never extended its hands to Beiliang, and Beiliang's Fu Shui Fang also tacitly did not place any pawns in Nanjiang. This kind of respect was not only because of Beiliang's 300,000-strong cavalry and Nanjiang's 200,000-strong army, nor was it because of the mutual fear between the 2 kings, Su Shao and Zhao Bing, but more importantly, it was a kind of appreciation between heroes. This kind of feeling was like seeing all the heroes in the world and being the only one on the same level. And in Zhao Zhu's generation, how could he, the crown prince of Yanqi, and the new Liang king Su Fengnian be ordinary friends? Previously, when he let Lin Hongyuan of the Dragon Palace get involved in the purple dress of Mount Hui, he also told Su Fengnian that if worst came to worst, he could just give up on Beiliang. In the end, Nanjiang was still a path of retreat for him. Among the intelligence reports that Zhao Zhu had obtained, the furthest he could get was fragmented news from Huainan Dao. Now that Kai Nan and Han Lin were the provincial governor and administrator respectively, it seemed that they had purposely blocked off all the channels of military intelligence from northern Liang. All the post-house routes, large and small, were tightly sealed off. Even the court bulletin from the Liyang Imperial Court did not mention a single word about the current situation in northern Liang. Therefore, Zhao Zhu only knew that 20 days ago, Wang Sui had led the elite cavalry of the Eastern Front to raid northern Ji, then rushed to River Province, heading straight for the Helan mountain range located east of northern Liang's Yuzhou. It seemed like the battles in Liuzhou and Liangzhou were not favorable to Beiliang. In the calculations of Zhang Dingyuan, Gu Ying, Yi Xiufeng, and the others, the chances of Beiliang winning were extremely small. Unless they won on all three fronts, whether it was losing the mobile cavalry of Liuzhou, causing the west gate of Liangzhou to be wide open, or Yang Yuanzhan's army breaking through Xiaoguang city and meeting up with Yang Yuanzhan's cavalry in Yuzhou, the Beiliang frontier army trapped in Liangzhou could only die in battle or wait for death. As for losing the central front of Liangzhou, there was no need to mention it. Zhao Zhu murmured softly, "It's good if you lose. When the time comes, you and I will fight side by side." Zhao Zhu straightened his body and stretched out a hand, clenching his fist tightly. Unlike the stiff atmosphere of the banquet ship on the western front of Guangling, Zhao Yi and Zhao Yuang personally held a banquet for their former confidant and subordinate Song Li in the Prince of Guangling's mansion. For the first time, the Guangling magistrate Wang Xiongui, who had always been closed to guests, appeared. When Song Li mentioned that Wang Yuanran, the youngest son of Lord Wang, had entered the capital's Ministry of Rights and become the director of the Department for Purging Officials, Wang Xiongui, who had been unable to conceal his gloominess, suddenly smiled. At the banquet, the two young officials temporarily observing politics in the Ministry of Works were ignored by everyone after Song Li personally blocked the wine for a young man surnamed Liu. The shifty-eyed guest of the prince's mansion, Zhang Zhupe, was not on good terms with Song Li, who had returned to his hometown. One was the chief strategist of the Guangling Springs Snow Building, while the other was a distinguished and handsome man that Zhao Yi viewed as a lucky general. However, tonight, Zhang Zhupe found all sorts of reasons to punish himself by drinking 7 or 8 cups of wine to the point that his mustache was sticky. Crown Prince Zhao Yi's eyes were gloomy, but Zhao Yi was all smiles from beginning to end. The night after the banquet ended, 2 officials from the Ministry of Works, who had come to inspect the rivers and canals of Guangling, met in a side courtyard of the prince's mansion to drink wine. The man surnamed Liu was actually blind. The young man surnamed Sun, who had been dead drunk at the banquet, was not drunk at all. He leaned lazily on a graceful chair made of red sandalwood and poured a cup of wine for the blind young man across from him. He smiled and said, "Song Li did not have good intentions. He purposely blocked the wine for you." He was clearly reminding Zhao Yi to tell the Guangling Prince's mansion that you, a minor official of the Ministry of Works, actually have a more special status than me, Sun Yin. The blind man Lu Xuan, who had entered and left the capital, sat upright and still. He was not as imposing as Sun Yin, who was famous throughout the capital. He said softly, "General Jinan is after all an old man of the spring snow building. A drop of water should be repaid with a spring of water. This action is not excessive. Why not have Song Li treated him with courtesy?" It would not have been easy for Zhang Zhupe to smoothly find Sir Sun to discuss matters. Sun Yin laughed loudly and said, "Zhao Yi is already in such a miserable state. What else can he do other than smash a broken jar? He could have turned a blind eye and let Zhang Zhupe choose a tree to nest in. In any case, he could have saved some incense for Crown Prince Zhao Yuang. In this way, the court would have 2 generals, Song Li, Lu Xingxiang, and Zhang Zhupe as a civil official. Only then would Zhao Yuang be able to steadily enjoy himself as a prince. Otherwise, when the world is peaceful and the power of the generals declines, without Zhang Zhupe's protection in the officialdom, any provincial governor from Guangling would be able to easily play Zhao Yuang to death. Lu Su smiled and said, "The general trend is like this. However, in the history books, are there any lack of tragic disasters caused by impulsive emperors? Sun Yin curled his lips with a disdainful expression. Lu Su sighed and said, "For people like Zhao Yi, no matter how bad his reputation is or how unbearable he is compared to the other vassal kings, he is still worthy of the respect of us younger generations who have taken advantage of the situation." Sun Yin frowned but gradually restrained his arrogance. He joked, "Sir Lu, you are not that much older than me. You act like an old man." Lu Su did not make a sound. Sun Yin lowered his voice and said, "I am very curious. How did you convince His Majesty to make the decision to send Liu Baijie from the Ministry of War to Guangling as the provincial governor? For this reason, you have completely angered the entire Gangnam-do scholar group. You have to know that Yu Jiankang and the other old men all hope that Tang Shi Sword Immortal can temporarily stay away from trouble. They would rather be like Su Gong and be hidden by the court in the two Liao provinces and have his official career delayed for 2 or 3 years. That would be better than being the first bird to make a name for himself. Therefore, many people say that you have attached yourself to the Ping family of Liaodong in the north in Great Peace City. That is why you are causing trouble for the 4 major families of Gangnam-do." Lu Su raised his head and closed his eyes, looking at Sun Yin. Sun Yin smiled embarrassedly. He was clearly embarrassed. There was no point in playing tricks in front of a smart person like Lu Su. Sun Yin was being unkind. Lu Su went straight to the point and said, "Qi Yanglong and Tantanan did not want Liu Baijie to come to Guangling. On the one hand, they valued his talent. On the other hand, they could not speak of it. After all, the Liu family and the Su family of Beiliang are in-laws. If history is a mirror, the so-called loyalty of the world is, in the end, the loyalty of the scholars. The loyalty of the people is nothing more than gaining the recognition of the scholars. The Liu family of Qingzhou entering Beiliang is already a warning. After that, there were scholars who went to Liangzhou and Wudang to debate Buddhism. At this time, Liu Baijie should not have come to Guangling, which is adjacent to Gangnam-do. However, if one does not have long-term considerations, one will have short-term worries. Once one has long-term considerations, most of them will have short-term worries. Sir Sun asked me how I convinced His Majesty. It was very simple. It was just one sentence. Let the current matter be, there is no need to worry about the short-term worries, and there is no need to worry about the future. Sun Yin grimaced. These words are a little overbearing. Lu Su raised his head and drank the wine in his cup. He laughed self-deprecatingly. Of course, before leaving the capital, I had a long talk with the emperor. For this sentence, I said thousands of sentences. Lu Su put down his wine cup. Compared to fighting on the battlefield, everyone is going to die. I, Lu Su, am just moving my lips. It is 100 times useless. Sun Yin shook his head and laughed. 100 times useless scholar. Zhang Zhupe, Song Li, Zhao Yi, Zhao Yuang and his son, Liu Baijie, Yuangue, your old master Zhao Sun, Wu Zhongshuan, Lu Xingxiang, and the entire Guangling. Such a big chessboard. You and I, 2 small minister counselors of the Ministry of Works, can maneuver freely here. How can we be useless? Lu Su lowered his head and looked at the table, just like when he sat in Yongzi Alley. There was a chessboard in front of him. Lu Su muttered to himself, there are wins and losses in chess, and there are profits and losses in gambling. However, for the sake of the emperor and the world, this kind of pointing out the country, our fingertips are all covered in blood. The last signing event of Shuizhong was held in Guangzhou. The specific address was Guangzhou Book Purchase Center, number 123 Tianhe Road. There are many things that can be said when we meet. P.S. Do not bring blades and other things. Chapter 1590. In the eyes of the people of Liang, Beiliang was a land of death. It was only a matter of time before the people were plunged into misery and suffering. Thus, when a carriage traveled from Hezhou to Yuzhou and not from Beiliang to the outside, it seemed like they were going against the flow. The coachman was a one-armed man with one empty sleeve. He held the reins with only one hand and tried to control the carriage as steadily as possible. Fortunately, compared to the simple carriage, the horse pulling the carriage was rather tall and strange. The middle-aged coachman did not need to spend much effort to control it. An old man bent down slightly and lifted the coarse cloth curtain blocking the wind and sand. His gaze passed over the one-armed man's shoulder and looked forward. He was silent and did not put down the curtain for a long time. The coachman turned his head and said softly, "Father, if I remember correctly, there are still a dozen li before we see the boundary marker between Yuzhou and Hezhou." The old man nodded, his expression somewhat absent-minded. The coachman frowned and said, "Even if Beiliang has never acknowledged the imperial court's edicts, father is still the deputy administrator of Beiliang in name. Would that Su Fengnian dare to kill someone? Since this is the case, why would father lower yourself to curry favor with Beiliang? If word gets to the capital..." The old man left the carriage and sat behind his son. He waved his hand and interrupted the temporary coachman's words. He smiled and said, "So what if some rumors get to Great Peace City? The foundation of the Yang family has never been in the center of the imperial court. Ever since the defeat of Guangling Taoism and your father went to the capital as a criminal, from His Majesty the Emperor to a little 6th or 7th rank official of the Ministry of War, who has treated father well. Other things aside, the tens of thousands of old soldiers of Ji province that father raised were taken away by the imperial court just like that. When you go to Ji province as a deputy general, you are only allowed to bring 3,000 soldiers and horses. This is built on the premise that you need to keep Yuan Tingshan in check. Otherwise, don't even think about bringing a single soldier back to Ji province." The coachman was none other than Yang Huchen, who had lost an arm in the battle against the remnants of West Chu. Now, together with Han Fang, the descendant of valiant bravery, whose family had their grievances redressed, he was the deputy general of Jizhou. Yang Huchen not only had to prevent Yuan Tingshan from raising troops in Jizhou, which was an important border area, but he was also a chess piece for the Zhao clan and Liang to monitor the king of Han, Zhao Xiong. The old man was, of course, Yang Shenxing, the newly appointed deputy administrator of Beiliang. He was one of the 8 great generals of the 4 campaigns and 4 towns in the past. In the past year, he had lived a miserable life in the capital where he was bullied by dogs. Not only did he have to live in fear, he was also laughed at by his colleagues in the officialdom. From time to time, he would be dragged out to drink. Although they said that they were helping the old general drink to relieve his worries, in fact, it was more or less the same as being dragged out to walk a monkey. They would find ways to sprinkle salt on the old man's wound. When it came to the skill of observing people and adding insult to injury, almost all the officials in the capital were great masters. If Yang Huchen had not been appointed deputy general of Jizhou by the Ministry of War, which meant that the emperor had not completely lost his patience with the Yang family, it was likely that the people sent off by the old man this time would not have been a few kittens and puppies, but none. This time, the old man passed through Jingji, West Ji, and Ji River. Although the old man did not have the intention of forming relationships with people, the fact that no one showed any interest along the way still made Yang Huchen, as his son, feel bitterly disappointed. Thinking back to the year when the Yang family sent troops from Jizhou to Guangling, what a grand occasion it was. At that time, if one was not at the level of county chief, one could not even think about getting a seat at the Yang family's private banquet. Probably sensing Yang Huchen's anger, the old man patted his son's shoulder and laughed softly. "Huchen, you can't blame the world for being so cold. Ever since I became a general, the Yang family has been used to doing whatever they want in Jizhou. We are not good people. The Yang family has bullied men and women many times. Now that we have suffered retribution, it is normal." Yang Shenxing looked around. The scenery in Hezhou was not very different from Jizhou. After all, they were both at the northwest border. After autumn, the grass was yellow like dirt. It could not compare to the beautiful scenery in Jiangnan where half of the city was green. The old man slowly closed his eyes and took a deep breath. On the other hand, retribution comes early, which is a good thing. If it comes too late, perhaps the court won't even give you the chance to be deputy general of Jizhou to make up for your mistakes. Besides, compared to that old man Yan Zhenchuan who has already died on the battlefield, I am much luckier. Don't look at how Zhao Kuei is only second to Lu Xingxiang in the southern expedition. Right now, that old man is like an ant on a hot pan. I dare to bet with you that if he loses the battle, he may not even be able to compare to Yan Zhenchuan, much less me. That is because the favor the court has given us old generals has been used up on me and Yan Zhenchuan. Thus, father's mood when he left the capital this time was not as bad as others thought. In truth, after leaving that great peace city that made people tread on thin ice, father's mood was much better. Along the way, I thought through many things. Young Huchen was relieved of a great burden. No matter what, as long as his father did not have too many worries in his heart, it was a good thing. He was confident that he could lead the Yang family to rise again. Yang Shenqing smiled. This time, I had someone send a secret letter to Mount Qingliang in private, pleading Beiliang to send an envoy to the Yuzhou border to receive me. As long as I don't see them, Yang Shenqing, will not take a step into Beiliang. I will just wait at the border. Yang Shenqing, was once a general. Now, I am putting on such a humble and pitiful attitude. Of course, this cannot be considered heroic behavior, but so what? Everyone in the capital is waiting for the news of my sudden death in Beiliang to spread, or for Su Fengnian to wantonly humiliate me on some occasion. I will not let them have their wish. Face is fake, but inside is real. The Yang family is in a precarious situation. Father is the face of the Yang family in the court. If it is gone, then it is gone. As long as you, Huchen, can stand firm in Jizhou again, in 5 or 10 years, the face will run back to the Yang family. At that time, even if you don't want it, perhaps other people will be willing to kneel and beg you to accept it. Chapter 1591. Young Huchen lowered his head, his eyes slightly red. His father, who had never acknowledged his old age, General Yang, who had always been indomitable for as long as he could remember, actually made him feel that he was really old. Yang Shenqing sighed. I'm just afraid that the young king of Beiliang will take his anger out on the Yang family because of the court. He will be dissatisfied with you because father is the deputy provincial governor. After all, Jizhou is not far from Beiliang. In the past, Su Shao, because of old ties, rarely ordered people outside of Beiliang. Now, Su Fengnian is in charge. Looking at the movements of Beiliang in the last few years in Su Fengnian's hands, it is clear that Beiliang is very aggressive and no longer purposely hides its edge. In the end, Beiliang and the court were only a step away from tearing into each other. Father's death this time is a risk, but also an opportunity. Huchen, focus on being the deputy general of Jizhou. Father has his own plans in Beiliang. From now on, remember a few things. First, do not entertain any of the old local generals of Jizhou. Second, control the distance between you and Han Fang. Finally, get close to the new administrator Han Lin. You must act as his lackey. In the future, Han Lin will be crucial for the Yang family to have a place in Great Peace City. Han Lin is not like other students of Zhao Yuling. On the surface, he is not as good as Zhao Yuling, Yin Mao Chen, or even Yuan Gua and Wang Xiongui. But in the eyes of the current emperor, Han Lin is the most important person. The reason is very simple. The three of them were all first-class officials promoted by the previous emperor, almost to the point where they could not be titled. Yuan Gua and Han Lin were people who had been placed in important positions by the emperor after he ascended the throne. Unfortunately, Yuan Gua's performance was not good and he has been completely abandoned. In this way, the emperor will place all his hopes on Han Lin. This is the greatest advantage for Han Lin. Han Lin seems to be the one with the least sharp edges in the Zhonglu back in the day, but it is precisely this kind of mediocrity that is not the same as mediocrity that is the greatest reliance in the officialdom. The longer it lasts, the more powerful it becomes. Yuan Gua is a counterexample. For some reason, the more Yang Huchen listened, the heavier his heart became. Yang Xinqing smiled lightly. Does it sound like I'm giving you my last words? Huchen, you are mistaken. Father just said that on this trip to Beiliang, Father does not have the slightest thought of dying, and will not stand up for the face of the court. Yang Huchen was slightly embarrassed. Yang Xinqing said earnestly, ever since the nomads of the great Qin dynasty turned into deep-rooted influential clans, the martial artists of our generation who carried the sabers in their hands have never had a glorious record in the history books. Those important figures who left their names behind were always associated with the four words of feudal towns. But the aristocratic clans who held the brush in their hands were usually associated with several generations of dukes. Even if they had been passed down for 100 years, they could not be called influential clans. Most of them had a history of 200 or 300 years, or even longer. To be able to enjoy the glory of 3 generations for 50 years was already a miracle. Right now, don't look at how the imperial court is suppressing the power of local generals and how everyone is in danger. Compared to those old fellows like Yan Zhenchuan and Zhao Qing, Father is looking further ahead. In the future, there might be a century-old surname belonging to a general in Liang. To achieve this, the blindly loyal Han family is a good example, but the Beiliang Su family is. At this point, Yang Xinqing suddenly stopped talking. In the end, she only let out a long sigh. Su Shao is not a formidable person. Yang Huchen was a little confused. The world recognized Su Shao as an arrogant and unruly general. If he wasn't an ambitious and ruthless person, could he be a hero? Yang Xinqing smiled and asked, Huchen, who do you think Beiliang will send to the border of Yuzhou to be the bad guy? Yang Huchen, who had long thought about this question, said softly, logically, it should be Yozhou's provincial governor Hu Kuei or Yozhou's general Huang Fuji. But now the war is in full swing, and these two may not be able to get away. But even if Beiliang wants to embarrass Father, I think they will send a Yuzhou county governor. As for Li Gongde and Song Dongming, who are nominally of the same rank as Father, the possibility is very small. After all, one of them is in charge of Mount Qingliang, and the other is in charge of the construction of the new city. I don't expect Su Fengnian to mobilize so many people. Besides, if one of them really does come to Yuzhou, I will suspect that Su Fengnian is harboring evil intentions. When the time comes, whether Father agrees or not, I will personally escort Father all the way to Liangzhou. Dozens of miles passed in the blink of an eye. When Yang Huchen saw the boundary steel by the roadside, he also saw 4 or 5 riders quietly waiting by the roadside. Among them, one rider was particularly eye-catching. Other than his young age, there was also a strange feeling about him that Yang Huchen felt. It was just like when he first saw a legendary martial grandmaster in his youth, it was like seeing a tall mountain. Just like when he met the emperor for the first time in the imperial palace of Great Peace City last year, he felt like he was facing an abyss. Yang Huchen even forgot to turn his head. With a trembling voice, he said, Father, it seems like he's come in person. Yang Xinqing had been sitting in the carriage with his eyes closed since approaching the border. When he heard Yang Huchen's trembling voice, he was somewhat puzzled. Could it be that Huang Fuji had arrived? Or perhaps Li Gongde and Song Dongming had come in person? Otherwise, given his son's temperament, there was no way he would be so flustered. The heavy-hearted Yang Xinqing lifted the curtain. It was noon, and for a moment, the sunlight above his head was rather dazzling. The old man squinted his eyes and looked over. When he clearly saw that rider, Yang Shinshing froze on the spot. Suddenly, this old man, who had not lost his fighting spirit even after entering the tiger's den of Bailiang, truly felt for the first time that he was indeed old. Without waiting for Yang Shinshing to get off the carriage, that rider galloped over first. He glanced at Yang Huchen, the fierce general of Liang who was acting as the coachman, and then said to Yang Shinshing with a smile, "Lord Yang has a good son." Yang Huchen was speechless when he heard the young man's comment. The old man who was not addressed as Great General Yang laughed out loud. He was not angry at all and said loudly, "In this regard, Yang Shinshing is far inferior to the Great General." Yang Shinshing, who had once been a Great General, respectfully addressed him as Great General. In the Liang dynasty, there was only Su Shao. Chapter 1592. Su Fingyan leaped off the horse, and Yang Shinshing followed suit. They walked side by side, while Su Fingyan introduced the group of people to the newly appointed deputy military governor. It turned out they were the local officials led by the county chief of Tongshan County. They were brought here purely to broaden their horizons. After all, Su Fingyan did not take Yang Shinshing seriously, but to the local officials of Tongshan County, this local emperor of Ji province was a name that reverberated like thunder in their ears. It was especially true for the Ji province infantry under Yang Shinshing's command, who were known to be unrivaled in the world. It had been a long time since they had the intention to compete with Yan Wumawan's Yuzhou army. Today, they were able to meet the old General Yang, which was a great topic to talk about after a meal. Su Fingyan asked the old man if the journey to the west was smooth, and Yang Shinshing answered with a smile. The atmosphere was so harmonious that it confused the officials of Tongshan County. As a matter of fact, although Yang Shinshing appeared to be regretting not having met the young lord earlier, he was actually sweating. Bailiang had even refused to accept the imperial edict. Now that Bailiang was in a state of turmoil and chaos, it was not a big deal to leave 1 or 2 corpses in the wilderness. Would the imperial court be willing to get to the bottom of the matter if they were labeled as bandits? The more friendly Su Fingyan was, the more uneasy Yang Shinshing was. Just as Yang Huchen had speculated, given Yang Jialong's difficult situation, it was already a great honor for him to be welcomed by the Yuzhou provincial governor. Yang Shinshing was not arrogant enough to think that he was qualified enough for the king of Bailiang to leave the front line to welcome him. Fortunately, Su Fingyan did not keep Yang Shinshing in suspense. He asked all the officials of Tongshan County to return to their residences and then stopped at a small tea stall beside the post road to rest. He woke up the woman who was dozing off and ordered 3 cups of tea with a smile. After sitting down, he told Yang Shinshing directly, "I came to Yuzhou to pick someone up. After drinking tea, I will soon leave for Helan Mountain in the northeast of Yuzhou. Wang Sui and his tens of thousands of Beimang cavalry are still waiting at the gate of Yuzhou. If I arrive late, I'm afraid I won't be able to see the famous prince consort of Dongyue." Yang Shinshing's expression did not change as he hummed in agreement. He was calculating quickly in his mind. This time, he had left the capital with the embroidery title of Deputy Provincial Governor of Bailiang. He was treated as a cold stove that had been doused with cold water. He did not exchange any letters on the way and did not have any contact with anyone on the way. He was completely blind to the situation in the world. He only knew what happened before he left the capital. Huda's city had fallen and Dongzhuo's army had been able to spread out the front line, causing the first line of defense outside Liangzhou Pass to be in danger. Yang Shinshing even thought that when he approached Yuzhou, he would see a large number of refugees hastily fleeing Bailiang. However, Su Fingyan casually mentioned that he was going to Helan Mountain to confront Wang Sui's cavalry. Yang Shinshing was shocked. Could it be that Bailiang was prepared to give up the entire battlefield outside Liangzhou Pass? Half a year ago, there were still a large number of Bailiang-related war reports that were frequently sent to the capital from Bailiang. Bailiang did not deliberately block these reports. However, since the beginning of spring in the 2nd year of Xiangfu, it was very difficult for the Zhaoguo spies and the officials of Huai to obtain first-hand information about Beiliang. Yang Shenxing heard that a few of the Zhaoguo strongholds that committed crimes were uprooted. Some of the spies disguised as Jianghu people who followed Xianyuan Qingfeng to Liang seemed to have been quickly detained by the Fu Shui room. When Su Fingnian took the teacup from the woman's hand, Yang Huchen could not help but roll his eyes. When the woman brought tea to the father and son, she directly knocked the teacup on the table. However, when she gave the young vassal king tea, she held the teacup with both hands and walked to the table. Her thick waist was also swaying like a big water snake. She was not in a hurry to put the teacup on the table. When Su Fingnian reached out to take the teacup, she naturally touched him lightly. The woman took advantage of him but did not stop immediately. She laughed and teased him, "Handsome young man, do you have a wife? If not, there is a beautiful girl in our village. Auntie will be your matchmaker." This shocked Yang Huchen to the core. Were all women in Beiliang so fierce? What was even more strange was that Su Fingnian did not get angry. Instead, he smiled and teased him a few times. His skin was as thin as the skin of a scoundrel in the marketplace. However, his words made the woman embarrassed for the first time. Yang Huchen suddenly felt a little unhappy. As a first-class general who had been on the battlefield for a long time, Yang Huchen did not have a good impression of this new Prince Liang. Now that he saw Su Fingnian's frivolous words and actions with his own eyes, Yang Huchen frowned even more. But for some reason, Yang Huchen saw the smile on his father's face from the corner of his eyes. It did not seem to be fake. It was quite like a veteran who saw a rising star. Yang Huchen was a little confused. Su Fingnian took a sip of tea. His next words scared Yang Huchen so much that he almost dropped the bowl. On the central front, Dongzhuo's army has been attacking Huaiyang Pass for a long time without success and has retreated. The situation at Liuzhou is the most tragic. Less than a tenth of the 30,000 Longxiang army survived. Lu Gue led the remnants of his army and fled to Longyao province. As for outside gourd mouth of Yuzhou, Yang Yuanzan is dead. Zhong Tan and Hong Jingyan have disappeared without a trace. Yang Shenxing lowered his head to drink the tea. His expression could not be seen clearly, but the ripples on the surface of the teacup continued to ripple. Yang Huchen subconsciously blurted out, "That's impossible." Yang Shenxing suddenly raised his head and angrily said, "Huchen, do not be impudent." Yang Shenxing put down the teacup and turned to Su Fingnian and said apologetically, "Your Highness, Huchen has been extremely rude. Please forgive me." Su Fingnian said playfully, "Forgive what? I, Su Fingnian, am not the Emperor of Liang. How can I punish a Deputy General of Ji Province?" Yang Shenxing's forehead was covered with sweat. Yang Huchen clenched his fist and pressed it against his knee under the table. He did not care about being scolded by the old man. He stared into Su Fingnian's eyes and asked, "Beiliang really defeated Beimang's 1 million iron cavalry?" Su Fingnian did not answer the question and slowly said, "Beiliang has lost a lot of people." Yang Shenxing said sternly, "Yang Huchen, you shut up." After meeting the emperor, Yang Huchen received a wonderful evaluation of loyalty and filial piety. At this time, the veins on his neck were bulging. He turned a deaf ear to the old man's reproach and stared with his eyes wide open. It was as if he was willing to risk his life to compete with the young king. Su Fingnian smiled and said, "Whether it is you, Yang Huchen, or your father, is it worth lying to me?" The one-track-minded Yang Huchen asked, "Dare I ask Wang Yi, how did Beiliang win 3 battles at the same time?" Without waiting for Su Fingnian to speak, Yang Shenxing stood up and slapped his son's head. "Bastard, no one will think you are mute if you don't speak." The man, who was the deputy general of Jizhou, was hit by his own father until his hair was disheveled, but he still did not give up. He gritted his teeth and asked, "Wang Yi, Beiliang really defeated the Beimang barbarians?" Su Fengnian nodded and said, they won. Yang Xinqing almost sent this bastard flying with a kick. Su Fengnian waved his hand at the old man, official Yang, it's fine. Yang Xinqing stomped his foot and said bitterly, Wang Yi, it's not that I'm boasting, but if it wasn't for Huchen's stubbornness, with his ability to lead troops, he would have been able to go to Great Peace City and become one of the 4 generals with real power. I really don't trust him to deal with the officials of Great Peace City. Wang Yi, look at him, when his bad temper comes up, he doesn't even know what's important in front of you. If he went to Jing, it would be terrible. Don't talk about losing his position, he might even lose his head. Su Fengnian smiled and said, General Yang is only suitable to lead troops in a local area. If he became an official at the foot of the emperor, he wouldn't be as good as those people who have already become shrewd. Even if General Yang became one of the 4 generals, he wouldn't be happy. Chapter 1593. Yang Xinqing sighed, that's right. That's why Huchen volunteered to go back to Jizhou. I didn't stop him. I couldn't have stopped him anyway. Yang Huchen muttered in a daze, won. Really won. Su Fengnian joked, what? General Yang doesn't want Beiliang to win. Aren't you afraid that your father will come all the way to Beiliang only to find the road filled with Beimang cavalry? Yang Huchen, who had finally returned to life with great difficulty, subconsciously reached out a hand to touch his empty sleeve. Losing an arm is something that I, Yang Huchen, have never thought of as much. It is just that in the end, it is still a bit regretful that it was cut down by our own people on the battlefield, and not outside the Great Wall, lost under the blades of the northern Mang barbarians. Yang Huchen grinned and suddenly stood up, scaring the old man to the point that he trembled. Yang Xinqing was afraid that this guy would contradict Su Fengnian again. He raised his hand and pressed on his son's shoulder, sit down and talk. Yang Huchen shook his head and raised his teacup. He said to Su Fengnian in a serious tone, Prince, there's no wine. Let Yang Huchen be so bold as to use tea instead of wine to toast you and all Beiliang soldiers. Northern Liang had achieved the biggest wish of Yang Huchen in this life. No matter what kind of bullshit situation Liang and Northern Liang would face in the future, I, Yang Huchen, would owe you a bowl of wine. If you were to die on the battlefield of Liangmang one day, I would lead my troops to the battlefield where you died and offer you a toast. If Su Fengnian dies at the hands of the Liang Imperial Court in the future, I will go to the execution ground alone to toast you with a bowl of wine. Yang Xinqing closed his eyes. Huchen, this child, really wanted to die. How could he say such rebellious and unlucky words? But unexpectedly, Su Fengnian also raised his teacup and stood up. He smiled, I have to drink this bowl of tea instead of wine. Also, if you, Yang Huchen, have the opportunity to come to Beiliang in the future, regardless of whether I'm dead or alive, remember to bring me a jar of good wine. How can one bowl be enough? Su Fengnian and Yang Huchen both drank their tea in one gulp. In the distance, the middle-aged woman who couldn't hear the conversation clearly turned around and glanced at the 3 guests. While she was tidying up, she grumbled, these men are really something. Drinking tea that costs only a few copper coins, yet they still have lofty aspirations. You're so particular. After drinking the tea, the former number 1 general of Ji province, Yang Huchen, took his leave and returned. Yang Xinqing, who still had lingering fear, laughed and scolded, get out of here. Su Fengnian and Yang Xinqing sat back down on their stools. The woman hurriedly picked up the teapot and poured another bowl of tea for the 2 of them. Su Fengnian smiled and said, Lady boss, don't just add tea without adding tea leaves. That's not very kind. Earlier, a bowl of tea cost 2 copper coins. Now, these 2 bowls are only 1 copper coin per bowl. The woman pinched Su Fengnian's arm lightly with 2 fingers and laughed angrily, fine, fine, fine. 1 copper coin it is. Just take it as Auntie taking advantage of you. It's not that Auntie wants to criticize you, but you're quite handsome. Judging from your accent, you're also from Beiliang. Why are you not straightforward at all? Auntie may think you're pleasing to the eye, but if I really have to choose a man to spend my days with, I'd still choose that rough man from my family. Su Fengnian smiled evilly and said, yes, yes, yes. You have a strong body and strength. The woman blushed and glared at him and said, little guy. You have a glib tongue. You look like a scholar. And a dabbler who can't even pass the exams. In the end, the woman hesitated and asked, unwilling to give up, you really don't want Auntie to be the matchmaker? Su Fengnian laughed loudly and shook his head. I already have a wife. At this moment, Yang Shenxing sighed. Beiliang was indeed not the same as Liang. Su Fengnian restrained his smile and said softly, people in poor places have a hard life. But while many people suffer, they don't accept their fate. Yang Shenxing nodded and said, the elite soldiers of the world are from Liaodong and Lianglong. The ancient saying is not without reason. Su Fengnian asked, Official Yang, there are two paths. One is to be a deputy provincial governor who has nothing to do and spend the rest of your life in Mount Qingliang. Without waiting for Su Fengnian to say the second path, Yang Shenxing said lightly, Prince, I'll choose this path. I'm old and can't afford to be tossed around. Moreover, even if I leave the capital, I'm still in Jizhou. Su Fengnian smiled and said, fine. Our Beiliang isn't big and the scenery can't be compared to the Central Plains. But in any case, Mount Wudong can avoid the summer heat. Outside the Great Wall, Lingzhou is also a good place to spend the winter. Whenever you feel bored in Mount Qingliang, you can walk around. Yang Shenxing wanted to say something but stopped. The old man didn't dare to believe that Su Fengnian would be so magnanimous. To be able to tolerate Yang Huchen's offense and even allow Yang Shenxing to enjoy life in Beiliang. If it were someone else who came to Beiliang to be a deputy provincial governor, they wouldn't be able to enter Yuzhou. Su Fengnian looked into the distance and said softly, Yang Huchen has a father who makes him willing to be a driver. Su Fengnian, didn't jump out of a stone. Of course, I have my own reasons. My father, Su Shao, has old debts in this life. Some of the debts he owes him have been repaid, some of them have not been repaid. There are also those he owes others, some of which he has repaid, some of which he is destined to never be able to repay. Su Fengnian glanced at the old man who had clearly forgotten a certain part of the past and smiled. Back then, there was a Liang commandant who, after losing to the king of Dongyue in succession, had saved up some money, but no one was willing to sell him several hundred soldiers. At the time, there was only one general called Yang Shenxing. Although he was also unwilling to sell his men, he was the only one who didn't make sarcastic remarks. One time, on the way to the Ministry of War's Yamen, he even took the initiative to chat with him. Many years later, that old man, who was no longer a junior commandant, told his son that one should hold a grudge, but one should also remember the good of others. Among them, he mentioned a general called Yang Shenxing who led soldiers into battle. He wasn't good, but he was passable as a person. Yang Shenxing said sadly, so there was such an old story. I've already forgotten about it. I didn't expect the great general to still remember and even tell your highness about it. Afterwards, the old man stroked his snow-white beard and chuckled. I, Yang Shenxing, should be content to have the great general personally say that I'm passable. Of course, as a general, Yang Shenxing, I'm still somewhat unconvinced that I'm not good at war, even if it was the great general who said it. Su Fengnian didn't comment on this. He smiled and said, in a moment, there will be people escorting official Yang to Liangzhou. I won't be seeing you off. Yang Shenxing nodded and said, as it should be. I wouldn't dare delay your highness's journey. Su Fengnian paid the bill. Very quickly, dozens of horses galloped over from the post house. Among them, there was a large horse with no rider. Yang Xinxing mounted the horse and cupped his fist to Su Fingnian. Your Highness, farewell. Su Fingnian made a sound of acknowledgement. Let's meet again in Liangzhou. The woman from the tea stall, who had been shocked by the dozens of horses, opened her mouth wide. She carefully pricked up her ears when she heard the title of Your Highness. After the cavalry was far away, she moved closer to Su Fingnian and asked curiously, Young man, your name is quite strange. Your surname is Wang and your name is Yi. Your parents are really generous with their names. However, from the looks of it, your father is a general of Beiliang, right? How about you take the money for the tea back? Su Fingnian, who was actually going to Lingzhou and not the Helan Mountains, shook his head and said with a smile, if in another 2 years, proprietress, you can still sell tea here peacefully and I happen to come here to drink tea, can you give me a discount? How about it? The woman smiled and said, sure, it's just a few copper coins. At most, I'll just scold my husband for being a wastrel. Sigh, it's a pity that when the time comes, I won't dare to touch you anymore. Su Fingnian said helplessly, you're still the one with a big heart. Strands of sunlight shone through the shade of the trees and fell on the small table, benches, and teacups. It was quiet and peaceful. Yang Xinxing, who was on horseback, looked back and vaguely saw the scene. For some reason, the old man in Beiliang had a thought. It was the Central Plains.